Coming to you live from Camp Crystal Lake. It's the movie Changeup podcast. This is our another bracket episode of the show. If you haven't watched it before, basically we break down various movies within a genre. The last time we did this, and the first time we did a James Bond. We broke down 24 movies, James Bond movies, and had them all compete against each other in bracket format. This time, because of Halloween last week, we decided, hey, let's do a horror movie bracket, and so that's what we did. We took a list of 28 horror movies, compiled of some of our favorite horror movies, and pitted them against each other to figure out what is the Movie Change Up podcast's favorite horror movie. I'm joined by the usual suspects. We got Johnny Mitchell, Bobby Mitchell, and Tristan Mayer. And I'll pose the same question to all of you, and we'll start with Johnny. We got a lot of options to choose from, 28 movies, and we seeded them. You're the one that was in charge of the seeding. Is there any, kind of low seeds that you're hoping to see make it go far?
Yeah, so basically what we did for everyone questioning how, the bracket is formatted is we all made our list of top 10 movies. Everyone's number one movie would get 10 points, and I just tallied up the points. If it was Joe's number 10 movie, that got one. And then depending on how many lists that made, we bracketed it based on how many points movies got, and then that left us with a few more, so we added a few classics in there that, maybe got left right out of our top 10s. I think it's going to be, I think we have a really solid three getting kind of like the first round buys. But I think the upset that could run far is in that It Chapter 1 area, because while I do love it, that is not the third best horror movie ever made. So, where that is a high bracket because we all just like that movie, I could see something making a run in there. Maybe like a Train to Busan or a Midsummer, depending on how people feel about those. Maybe even a Gremlins. I would say, though, the one that I could see, it has a really tough first round matchup, but could go pretty far. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it just needs to get past The Exorcist in the first round, which might be too much to ask for it. So if it does, then I think that makes a run. But otherwise, it's basically one of those teams. It's like a 15 seed. It loses in the first round and gets swept, or it's going to run to the final four. So we'll see. But I think if I had to guess, my biggest fight will be for Midsummer, and I'm going to see how that does for me.
All right, and Bobby, I'm going to ask you the same question. Is there any movie that's a lower seed that you're hoping to see go a ways?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely some that I'd like to see go a little ways. I'm not sure based on the number one movie in that bracket how much of a chance it has, but you never know until we start talking. But one is Alien. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and throwing it into horror, I think it may have an outside shot because it kind of has a different genre thrown in there and is known for a different, in a different way. Also, Gremlins, classic movie close to my heart that we watched a lot growing up. So it's got a tough matchup, like Johnny said, with Midsummer, which is a good movie, but I'd like to see that go a ways too.
All right, and Tristan, same question.
I'm looking forward to this a lot. One that I'm going to be fighting for that has a pretty tough second matchup is going to be The Evil Dead 2. I think that's one that I love and have a lot of fond memories for and some arguments for. But of course, it has to battle Halloween, so it's going to be a tough fight for that one. I'll see how that goes. I'm also looking down at that It Chapter 1 bracket, though. And one movie on here that I didn't put on my list, but I think has a really good fighting shot for a run here is Quiet Place, the first Quiet Place. I think that was a really impressive movie. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on it because we haven't talked too much about that movie, but I know it impressed a lot of people, and I think it has a similar kind of vibe of It Chapter 1 where it was kind of in that same time frame of horror and that same kind of vein of horror. So if it does come through and beat it, it could really actually go through and have a Final Four appearance if it has a good run there. So I'm curious to see how that goes in that bracket down there.
All right, and for me personally, I'm going to agree with Bobby in that I'm kind of hoping Alien can go on a run. It's the 8 seed, so it's got a little bit of an advantage for a bit, but I'm also rooting for Gremlins, which is a 19 seed, and I think it'll come down to taste a little bit. It's a classic movie, and it's going up against some newer movies to start off with, so we'll see how that goes. But without further ado, if anyone doesn't have anything else, let's get to it.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right, I'll just start off with reading some of the movies. So in our top left bracket, in the number 1 seed that will kick off the second round, we have The Shining. And then in the 16 seed, we have Night of the Living Dead, and that'll face off against the 17 seed Hush from 2016. Next up, we have Scream from 1996 going against The Ring from 2002. And then finally, in the top left corner, we have Alien from 1979 going up against The Fly from 1986. So let's start with this first matchup. We have Night of the Living Dead from 1968, directed by George A. Romero. The plot of the movie is a ragtag group of Pennsylvanians barricade themselves in an old farmhouse to remain safe from a horde of flesh-eating ghouls that are ravaging the east coast of the United States. And then Hush we have from 2016, directed by Mike Flanagan. The plot is a deaf and mute writer who retreated into the woods to live a solitary life must fight for her life in silence when a mass killer appears at her window. So we, to an extent, have similar plots. You know, there's people locked inside their house, and they're kind of an evil entity outside, and it's kind of difference is mainly what that evil entity is. So let's start with Bobby. Do you have a horse in this race? Who would your vote be?
I think I mentioned before we started the show that Hush is one of the 2 movies on this list that I have not seen. It looks good. I just never got a chance to see it. But Night of the Living Dead is a classic. I definitely like that movie, and I would, I can't compare the 2, but I'd say that at least has the pedigree to move forward. It's a classic zombie movie that kind of set standard in a lot of ways.
All right, so this could get interesting because I'm on the opposite side of the fence where I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, but I have seen Hush, and it was on my personal top 10 list of horror movies. So I'll jump over to Johnny, and between these 2 movies, where does your vote lie?
If I'm being honest here, if I was going to sit down and watch one of these movies right now, or sit down with my fiance and say, hey, let's check out a horror movie, it would definitely be Hush because it just has the modern aspects of horror. But I mean, this one isn't even close. Night of the Living Dead is a classic, and it's got the prestige. This isn't going to be the way a lot of these votes go today, so I think this is an easy one to kind of knock off. Hush is solid for what it is. Like a good home invasion movie. It's well directed. Mike Flanagan has a way to elevate simple stories into, much better movies than they should be. But Night of the Living Dead was the first thing to kind of really do that. It, you don't have to go through all the things that it did, but it accomplished a lot at the time, and is a huge credit to a lot of the, I'm not big on the zombie genre in general, but it's the reason the zombie movies now that are so huge is what it is. So you got to give it up to Night of the Living Dead here, even though, if I was going to sit down and watch one, I probably enjoy watching Hush more. But Night of the Living Dead, if you're a film fan, I think it's just such an interesting watch. It's just not one that I'd put on to watch with someone else and be like, hey, let's actually watch something that might freak you out a little bit, because it doesn't really have any scares in it nowadays that you watch it. But, I like it as a film fan a lot, so I'm pushing it through.
All right, Tristan, where's your vote go? Are you going to make this interesting, or are you going to cast away Hush off into the depths of...
I'm going to throw some love to Hush. I do think Mike Flanagan is a great horror director. He's working on he's like actively making great stuff over and over again. So he's really impressing me as a director. And this is one of his kind of launching off movies, I think. And one that kind of made him someone that was on the eye of horror fans. So I really want to give him some love for that. And it was creative too, the way that he used the main character being deaf for the horror and for some of the kind of cinematography of it, and similar ways to like Quiet Place used its sound really interesting. And I think this has really interesting sound as well. So I want to give him some shout out for creativity. And if you haven't seen Hush, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's very watchable. It's very like entertaining and has a lot of good scares. But Night of the Living Dead is an all-time classic, and I am going to fight a lot for it as we go further along this run here. But Hush, I definitely think it's good and worth checking out. But for me, it's not. I wouldn't have even thought of it being in the conversation of my top 50 horror movies that I've seen. But I do like it, so check it out.
All right, and with that, Night of the Living Dead advances, which means we move to our next matchup, which is Scream from 1996 and The Ring from 2002. So Scream, like I said, 1996, directed by Wes Craven. The plot is: a year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends by using horror films as part of a deadly game. And then we have The Ring in 2002, directed by Gore Verbinski. A journalist must investigate a mysterious videotape which seems to cause the death of anyone 1 week to the day after they view it. We started with Bobby last time, and I'll go over to Johnny this time. Between these two movies that came out 6 years apart, where does your vote go?
This one's a tougher matchup to me than some people might expect, just because I'm not huge on either. I think they're both serviceable horror movies. And I think Scream gets a lot of credit for being like that first of its kind, first meta, horror, like meta comedy. But as kind of mentioned in our opening, Gremlins 2 and New Batch did it before Scream, and I think did it better. So it's tough for me to kind of give Scream that credit. You've kind of seen good horror comedies before that, and it's been parodied so much it's hard to take seriously. But The Ring is just something that never really did it for me. And while Scream, I think there's meta, horror movies that did it better after, and a couple before, but it changed the generation, really inspired a lot. The Ring did the same thing. Never, nothing ever came out inspired by The Ring and was very good, like The Grudge and stuff like that. But we're talking about the 2002 American remake of The Ring, and it's came out and it's a weaker version of the Japanese version from '98. So for that reason, I'm going to go Scream here, because if I'm comparing both American films, it's definitely Scream. I think it'd be a much tougher decision if it was the Japanese Ringu, but it's not. So Scream is a better movie. So I'm going to send that through. There's still moments to love in that one.
All right, Tristan, where's your vote going?
I like The Ring a lot, and I think it definitely works as like a time capsule of that era, especially the technology of that era. It's fun to go back and watch it, and it's very like directly about like the technology of VHS tapes and how they work, and like when you copy a VHS, this happens and this happens, and it's really kind of fascinating how as that technology changed, it still kind of works, and they do a good job of making you understand the horror of it and follow the plot, even though it is technology that is no longer relevant. And I also think it has that very iconic horror character that comes out of the TV. That's a horror character that I think has lived on just as much, arguably, as Ghostface has, and from Scream. So I wanted to give them a shout out for that. But I'm going to give the win to Scream here, just because I think it's a better movie, one, and I also think it's inspired better movies after it and has had better sequels. Like The Ring is kind of a nice one-off remake of another movie that I think is good, but I think Scream started a new thing. It might have not been the first meta horror comedy, but it was like a watershed moment of horror comedy that kind of changed the whole game of it, and I want to give it some love for that. And The Ring, I think, is worth watching, but Scream gets the win for me from here for sure. It's a harder fight definitely than the last one, because I think The Ring has a really iconic character just as much as Scream does, and a really iconic ending too, terrifying ending that always sticks with me. But I'm going to go with Scream, even if it's just nostalgia a little bit. But yeah, Scream is going to be the one for me. It's a big moment in horror for sure.
All right, Bobby, you gonna make this interesting, or are you sending The Ring down back into the well?
I saw to be a little different than Johnny. It is close, but to me, I like both these movies quite a bit. They both came out. Well, Scream I saw at a very like the perfect age. Watched it, at someone's house at a sleepover. And that franchise is one that I get a lot of enjoyment out of most of the movies. 2's not so good, but I do like 3 and 4. And Scream is, I just think it has one of the best openings, most iconic openings for a horror movie, even just a horror movie, not even a comedy at that point. It does the meta very well for what it's doing in the slasher genre, especially from Wes Craven, who was a part of the slasher genre. And The Ring is good. I liked that. That came out, I was like 11 or 12 or whatever whenever that came out, and it's a good movie. I enjoy it, but it does feel a little bit more dated watching it now, especially with the whole VHS aspect. A lot of research scenes and stuff like that. It gets a little slow. So I do like the movie, but Scream to me is a classic, and I like that franchise a lot, and that first movie for sure. So I'm going to say Scream.
All right, and with that, with the clean sweep, Scream advances. And we'll see what takes on Scream in the second round. Is it going to be Alien or The Fly? And Alien came out in 1979, directed by legendary director Ridley Scott. After a space merchant vessel receives an unknown transmission as a distress call, one of the crew is attacked by a mysterious life form, and they soon realize that its life cycle has merely begun. The Fly in 1986, directed by David Cronenberg. A brilliant but eccentric scientist begins to transform into a giant man-fly hybrid after one of his experiments goes horribly wrong. I'll kick off this one. For me, The Fly is great. It's probably one of the best body horror movies there are. The special effects are great. I love I'm blanking. Jeff Goldblum's performance in this. Gina Davis is good as well. But for me, Alien's just too iconic. I've seen it way more times because I enjoy it much more. I like the directing. It's inspired a massive franchise. Not that that's necessarily the marker of a good movie, but it is. I feel like the marker of an impact of the movie. And so that, for me personally, my vote goes to Alien. So, Johnny, where are you leaning between these two?
Yeah, I'll echo Joe's praise of The Fly. One of the best, probably the best body horror movie of all time. Cronenberg at his best there, and Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis at their best. There's a lot to love in it, but it doesn't compare to Alien. I mean, The Fly could have made a run maybe if it had an easier matchup in the first round. But Alien is not only... I mean, if you checked out our Mount Rushmore last week for costume design, I said... Well, I thought it was costume design. I said the Xenomorph. I think it's the most amazing creature costume of all time. And it is so scary. And that's something that will legitimately freak you out, where The Fly will kind of disgust you. Alien, you're afraid of the creature. It's the best, it's one of the best monster movies ever made. And it's one of the best, just haunted house movies. It's on a spaceship, but it's kind of like a home invasion with a monster there. That's going to be... Like we mentioned before, I think Alien set up for a possible run, and I don't think this one's particularly close, as good as The Fly is. I think The Fly is the second best movie we've talked about so far, and Alien blows it out of the water.
All right, Tristan, you seem like you could be a Fly fan. What are you thinking with this matchup?
Yeah, you guys have talked a lot about how great Alien is, and it's this very iconic, huge turning point in sci-fi horror. It's a slasher on a spaceship, but it also has these really great moments of craft. I'll always remember watching that scene where the pilot is going through the vents, crawling through. He's like, "Where is it at? Where is it at?" He just sees it on the radar. He's kind of getting all disoriented, and he turns around, and just in the flash, you see the alien killing him. And I screamed, I jumped up and hit my dad right in the face to the back of my head. I was a kid, probably too young to be watching Alien, and smashed my dad right in the face with my head because I jumped so big at that scene. And I'll always remember that movie. I watch it all the time. I have the 4K right here that I bought years ago at this point, and I watched this movie all the time, whether it was on 4K, Blu-ray, DVD, VHS, all the time. But David Cronenberg's The Fly, I think, is a great body horror, a fantastic body horror, and body horror is one of my favorite subgenres of the subgenre of horror, and something that definitely terrifies me. And I love practical effects. I love Cronenberg's practical effects. I think this is a huge turning point for Cronenberg's career. He has some stuff like a Videodrome and deeper cuts like that, but The Fly is like his big iconic hit. And you mentioned Jeff Goldblum's performance and the great effects on his body, like peeling off of him and melting. And so I'm going to go ahead and give an upset win here to The Fly. I think it has the practical effect you're talking about of Alien, the cool costume, but it also has more than that, and has this artsy art house director coming in and making this movie that broke out into a big hit. And I'm going to give the win to The Fly there.
All right, Bobby, you making this interesting, or
I mean,
you sending
I
The
think
Fly back to the swarm?
Yeah, I think I tipped my hand as
Down.
picking picking Alien is one of my ones I'd like to see go far. The Fly is great. Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis they really sell the movie, other than just the body horror aspects to it. But their chemistry is great. Jeff Goldblum is almost always an entertaining lead. And I saw it for the first time. I think Johnny and I watched it for the first time together a few years ago. And it's a really good movie. I like it quite a bit, but to me, it doesn't compare to Alien. Alien's classic. It has one of the best creature designs, like Johnny said, and also one of the most famous like characters created in Ripley. And I think that it just, you know, I don't want to reiterate what everyone else has said, but to me, Alien is a far better movie.
All right, and with that, we have Alien advancing to the next round to face Scream, which means we move to the bottom left corner of our bracket, where we figure out who will probably eventually lose to Get Out. And so with that, at the top in the 4 seed, we have Get Out from 2017. And then in our first matchup, we have Us from 2019 going up against Candyman from 1992. We have Doctor Sleep from 2019 going up against Nosferatu from 2022. We have Psycho from 1960 going up against Hellraiser from 1987. So,
Joe, you meant 1922 for Nosferatu.
That's what I
not
meant.
2022.
That's
we are seeing in the future for
movie. Yeah.
They should have made a Nosferatu for the 100th anniversary. That's all I'm saying.
They are. The guy who did the Lighthouse and stuff, I think, is doing.
Oh,
that's his next movie.
Oh,
Yeah.
Which I'm super excited for.
Yeah.
I picked that one.
Yeah, I picked that
Can
one.
that win already?
Even though it's not out yet, I just know.
The Lighthouse is like a movie primed for me to walk out of there being like, that movie was fucking ass, and I loved it, so. All right. So, our first matchup, we have Us versus Candyman. So, Us, 2019, directed by Jordan Peele. The plot is a family serene beach vacation turns to chaos when their doppelgangers appear and begin to terrorize them. And then we have Candyman from 1992, directed by Bernard Rose. The Candyman, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, is accidentally summoned to reality by a skeptic grad student researching the monster's myth. Bobby, we haven't started with you for a while. You've seen both of these. Where are you going? Where's your vote?
I like both these movies. Us, I think we're in a group. I know at least how Johnny feels about it, where I think we like it more than most people. It didn't quite hit as hard as Get Out. Some people had some problems with it, but just the performances alone, and especially Lupita Nyong'o and her dual role is amazing. The soundtrack at this point it very quickly became iconic with I Got Five on it laid throughout the score. And it's, even if the ending didn't hit for everyone, it landed for me. And it's, I think it's a fantastic movie with a lot of good scares and a lot of good tension, and good characters. Candyman's iconic. Everyone knows you say Candyman in front of a mirror, and all that stuff. And they made the recent, what is actually a sequel, even though it was kind of promoted as a remake, but the new one too.
Spoilers.
Which I hear is good. They just didn't market it that way, but everyone kind of knows at this point now. It's a really good movie. It kind of stands out looking back on it. A lot of these movies that I wasn't sure if it would hold up, and when I saw it for the last time, I thought it was a really good movie. But to me, it doesn't compare to Us, especially the performance aspect. I think is like Lupita Nyong'o should have had an Oscar for that movie. So I'm gonna go with Us.
All right, Tristan.
This is the hardest one yet for me. I think both of these movies are great, and they're also kind of great in similar ways because they have like this commentary element to them. And I think in a way you wouldn't get Us, you wouldn't get Out if you didn't get Candyman, because Candyman was this very pioneering moment for black horror, and Tony Todd was this icon that really kind of, especially in this character, took off. And I loved the remake that sequel as well. I thought that was really good. So I was impressed by that. Us, I loved, and I think when you get Out, you think, oh, this could be a one hit. There's no way this guy could is he gonna do a sequel that is also not a sequel, but his second movie is gonna be just as good as his first movie, and it's like so impressive to see that follow up be just as good as the first one, and I can't wait to see what he does next. So it's a very close call for me on both of these. I think they're two of my favorites here. And Us, like you mentioned, Lupita Nyong'o should have gotten an Oscar for that one. And I think she deserved the Oscar for that performance. And it was really groundbreaking and interesting. And I remember walking out of it and everyone having kind of a discussion about what it meant. And like, what was he trying to say? Was he trying to say anything at all? Or was he just making a good horror movie? And I love a movie that has a conversation like that. And for me, Candyman does. So I'm going to go ahead and give the win to Candyman because I think it is a pioneering movie, and it started a conversation and created a really cool, iconic character. It's a barely squeezing it out ahead of me. but I want to give tiny little upset here to Candyman and see where we go from here. So I'm giving the win to Candyman here.
All right, Johnny, where are you at?
These were in my list of top 10 horror movies ever. These were my 9 and 10. So they're so close. I probably could go back and forth anytime, like whatever I watched last. Maybe it jumps ahead. I love Us. Us, yeah, like Bobby said, I'm higher on that movie than I feel like most people are. Like I think that could be on a very similar level to Get Out. It just Get Out was unexpected because it was coming from the guy from Key and Peele, and no one really knew what he could do. But the reason we even got Us, and the reason Jordan Peele even got into horror is because of Candyman. I think that, like that movie, he said that had like a seismic impact on him as a younger man watching that movie. And it's so far ahead of its time. You could go back and watch it now, and it has a lot of themes that we're still talking about today and that are still relevant and prevalent in Jordan Peele's movies. You see that influence heavily. So I had Us was my number 10, but Candyman is my number 9. So I agree with Tristan. I'm giving the small little upset to Candyman here. I rewatched it twice within 24 hours after seeing the new one because I just needed to, like, I watched it, was reminded how amazing it was, and then needed to kind of read everything I could about it and rewatch it again, knowing that all the bees were practical and all of this crazy stuff for the production. So it's an amazing movie to read about. It's an amazing movie to watch. I think Candyman gets the upset here for me. So that makes it 2-1 with the lower seed going to Joe.
All right, well, this makes it really interesting, and I'll just say this. How I've been going throughout this is if someone hasn't seen a movie, their vote doesn't really count. I've seen Us, loved Us, haven't seen Candyman, so I feel like it's unfair for me to vote, really, because it's like, okay, maybe I vote for Us, but then it's like we go to a tiebreaker, and essentially in the tiebreaker, I feel like Candyman would win out because it's still like, okay, I haven't seen it. So, ultimately, my vote doesn't count, so I feel like Candyman advances 2-1.
Yeah. And I'm good with that. Candyman's fantastic, and it did influence Us, so that's good with me.
I want to shout out to Us for having a really great Universal Horror Nights haunted house that I went to a couple years ago, where it scared me so much I fell backwards and lost my balance. So great, good job, Us.
All right. Yeah, that sounds amazing. You've told us about that before, and that sounds like it would be awesome. All right, I'm excited for the next matchup here.
Oh, yeah. Next matchup, we have Dr. Sleep versus Nosferatu, which should be fun. We have Dr. Sleep from 2019, directed by Mike Flanagan, his second appearance on this bracket. Years following the events of The Shining, a now adult Dan Torrance must protect a young girl with similar powers from a cult known as the True Knot, who prey on children with powers to remain immortal. Nosferatu from 1922, directed by F.W. Murnau. Vampire Count Orlok expresses interest in a new residence and real estate agent Hunter's wife. Let's start with Tristan. Tristan, have you seen both these movies? Where's your vote going?
Yeah, I've seen both of these, and it's kind of tough because I really love Dr. Sleep. I think it's kind of underrated in a way of people didn't really see it a lot when it came out. It's never really started a conversation, but I think as a sequel to both the movie The Shining, which we'll talk about later, but also the book The Shining, I think it does a great job of melding those two worlds together and tributing the themes of The Shining without, at least until the end, being, oh, here's everything from The Shining again, and I think in the book Dr. Sleep, they don't necessarily have all of that connective stuff at the end, and I think slightly the movie Dr. Sleep is held back by having that last act that's just a bunch of here's the stuff from The Shining again. And I loved the performance of Ewan McGregor in that movie. I think it was a really fascinating look at the impact of like abuse and alcoholism in a family and like the impact of trauma throughout like a generation, because that was something that was really prominent in the book of The Shining, like the fact that Jack Torrance was kind of abused as a child and had this traumatic experience in his past that he was kind of passing down towards his son, and he was afraid that like his son was going to also have that violence in him. And I think the Dr. Sleep movie does a great job of capturing that in a way that the movie The Shining didn't necessarily capture. So I loved the Doctor Sleep for that. Nosferatu is a classic for sure. It has like a very distinct look and a lot of great, very iconic shots that are, I watched it in school. Literally, I watched it in film school because that's the kind of movie it is. Like, it's a film school movie that you watch to study and watch to like learn and be like, oh, engrossed by the shots. And there are some incredible shots. And I really love the German expressionist era of horror with these really exaggerated shadows and these really dark blacks. And it looks incredible, but I'm gonna have to go the When the Doctor Sleep. I think it's a really underrated classic of the recent kind of years, and I think people will maybe look back on it and like it more than they did when it first came out. So I'm giving the When the Doctor Sleep here.
All right. Let's go to Johnny. Johnny, have you seen both of these? What are your thoughts on both?
Yeah, it's funny because I, like a lot of the people my age and generation, the first time they heard Nosferatu might have been from a SpongeBob episode.
Yeah.
And
Nosferatu.
I never really took it seriously, and then I became super into films, and I checked it out because I think the same horror set as Joe that has like 50 horror movies, and it has a bunch of old school silent black and white movies. So I watched Nosferatu. Like Tristan said, it's definitely a film school type of movie. It's something you check out, you kind of watch for the impact it had afterwards, and to be like, oh my god, they made this in 1922. But I watched The Kid, Shirley Chaplin's movie, this morning, and that's a movie that I'll actually like throw on and enjoy. That was from the same era. Nosferatu is one that you watch once, you say, oh, that was cool that they made it then. Doctor Sleep, I was very iffy on going into it because I didn't like that it was a sequel to The Shining, one of my favorite movies, and I'd never heard of the book. Even though I'm a Stephen King fan, I didn't know it was an actual book. I was, iffy on the trailers, but then Joe convinced me to check it out, and I watched it, and I was kind of blown away by it. I thought Doctor Sleep was awesome, and I'm going to watch it again. I watched both the director's cut and the regular cut within like a week of each other, and they're both almost 3 hours long, so that kind of says a lot about a movie when it can hold your attention. I think the 3 hours of Doctor Sleep holds your attention a lot better than the 80 minutes of Nosferatu, so Doctor Sleep gets this win for me. And again, Mike Flanagan, he takes a book that probably not a lot of people were even aware of from Stephen King as far as his books go, and he just elevates everything he does, directing wise. So Hush lost in the first round, but I want a Flanagan movie to go through for sure. So Doctor Sleep gets the win for me.
All right, so I'll say this: there was a stretch there for like 6-7 years for like every Halloween. I always watched Nosferatu on Halloween, and then I just got busy and was doing other shit and didn't really carry through with that. But super iconic movie, super like kind of influential movie, especially when it comes to vampire lore, because Nosferatu, for anyone that doesn't know, is basically Dracula, but they couldn't get the rights to Dracula, so they essentially just changed the name. They had to change how he died. They couldn't have him die through a stake through the heart. They just had him die by being exposed to sunlight, and that's where that whole thing comes from. But Doctor Sleep is amazing. I agree with everything Johnny said of like how can this sequel to The Shining hold up when The Shining is one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. I mean, it's seated number one in our bracket, and I feel like it does hold up, and I feel like it is a worthy sequel to a Stanley Kubrick movie, which sounds nearly impossible. So, without forcing it to Bobby, I'll ask him where his vote would have went, but my vote would go for Doctor Sleep as well. So, Bobby, where are you at? Would it have been a clean sweep?
It would have been a clean sweep, yeah. Not to give it away, but really, Johnny and Joe, you both took my 2 points. I was going to bring up about Nosferatu, which is first saw it in SpongeBob, and that it was basically it was Dracula, but that was when it was not public domain, so they had to change it and all that. But it's a very iconic classic movie. It like Johnny said, it's cool to look back on, but Doctor Sleep pulled off an amazing feat of being a sequel to one of the best horror movies of all time. And I also want to bring up Rebecca Ferguson, who played a fantastic villain in the movie, Rose the Hat. I think she kills it in there along with Ewan McGregor. So yeah, I would go with Doctor Sleep as well. I think that's a great movie. I like the ending more than some other people with the Shining references, but that may be the weakest part, but I still enjoy it, and I just think it's a great movie.
Yeah, and I will say,
I will.
oh
Yeah,
go,
sorry,
you go
Joe.
ahead, Johnny.
Real quick, if you haven't seen Nosferatu and don't really know much about it other than his iconic look, or if you've seen it and you've never checked out the movie Shadow of the Vampire, um, Shadow of the Vampire is one of my favorite movies. It's John Malkovich is F.W. Murnau, who directed Nosferatu, and what's his name? Willem Dafoe. Sorry, John Malkovich is the director, and then Willem Dafoe is Max Schreck, the actor who portrayed Nosferatu. But in Shadow of the Vampire, it basically is behind the scenes, but Max Schreck is actually a vampire they cast to do this role, and the director promised him the lives of the rest of the cast in order to make this movie. It's really good. It's like an homage to old school horror movies, but it's a movie that I feel like no one ever talks about, and I think it's just incredible. So I recommend that to any like horror fan or film fan or Nosferatu fans for sure. Shadow of the Vampire from 2000. Great movie.
I also want to recommend Vampire from 1932, 10 years after Nosferatu, but it follows a haunted village being haunted by a vampire, and they're going to investigate like these killings. So if you like the look and the style of Nosferatu, Vampire kind of does the same look and kind of ups the ante. It was 10 years later, director of Carl Theodor Dreyer, one of the really iconic silent film directors. So if you want to see more silent vampire German expressionist from the similar era, check out Vampire. It's on Criterion Collection. You can also watch it on HBO Max and a bunch of streaming platforms. You can find it online too.
All right, and one final point about each movie that I wanted to bring up as far as the influence of Nosferatu that Johnny was talking about, how Max Schreck was the actor that played Nosferatu. It's also, that is where Tim Burton got the name for the villain in Batman Returns, because that whole movie, it was essentially a love letter to German silent film. And then also I just wanted to bring up that Dr. Sleep stars legendary actor Cliff Curtis, who you might hear about more in a future episode of Movie Changeup. And that brings us to our next matchup. We have Psycho from 1960 versus Hellraiser from 1987. Two very similar movies. Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, is about a Phoenix secretary who embezzles $40,000 from her employer's client, and she goes on the run and checks into a remote motel run by a young man under the domination of his mother. Hellraiser, directed by Clive Barker, a woman discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her brother-in-law. She starts killing for him to revitalize his body so she can escape the demonic beings that are pursuing him after he escaped their sadistic underworld. I feel like I know where this matchup is going to go, but let me start with Bobby.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that. I don't know if it was on the air or not, but I've never been a big Hellraiser fan. I watched a couple of them growing up, including the first one, and even though it's a very iconic look and like it's a very striking design for Pinhead and that, but it's nothing that really stuck with me. And to me, it's not that close. Psycho is a classic. It was the first of its kind. It did a lot of groundbreaking stuff as far as the genre goes. Something that Scream replicated by killing off one of the big actresses early on and all that, and it's lived on in pop culture, and it just holds up as a movie. So to me, it's not that close. I'll leave it to everyone else who's seen, or at least is more of a fan of Hellraiser than I am, to talk a little bit more about that franchise. But to me, it's not close, and Psycho wins it.
All right, Tristan, you seem like you like Hellraiser. What are you voting for?
I do like Hellraiser. I mentioned earlier how much I love body horror and practical effects, and Hellraiser has some incredible body horror and practical effects. I know Pinhead is what's kind of lived on as the icon of Hellraiser, but when you watch this movie, there's a lot of really cool creatures, a lot of really cool effects, and when I watched it, I was really blown away. We're going to talk about like The Thing and the way that a lot of the effects in The Thing, you see it now and you would still believe it was a real, and a lot of this stuff in Hellraiser, it's these really abstract, crazy, like unimaginable looking things, but they yet still look real because they're just like these practical things that are really in front of the actors. And I think those effects are really, really impressive. And Hellraiser, I think, has this really like erotic tone to its horror. And I think that's makes it really interesting. I think the connection between like eroticism and horror is something that is in these kind of B horror movies, and I wanted to throw some love to Hellraiser for that too, because I think it has this really interesting way that like the creatures come in and they can't distinguish pain from pleasure. So there's just like this weird sexual tone overtone to a lot of the horror, and we'll talk about that in a couple of the other movies I think. But a Psycho is an all-time classic. How do you go against like ultimately one of the best movies of all time with one of the best central performances in a horror movie? Anthony Perkins is just so great as Norman Bates, and the fact that even in all the terrible sequels, he comes back and like still makes him like he's the only thing that's even remotely good in any of the other Psycho movies, and like he loved this character, he really made it his own, and they adapted a book that was such a good big pop hit into mold like pop with the Alfred Hitchcock kind of craft. It's a really great turning point in horror and an iconic classic. So I'm gonna have to go with Psycho for the win here, but Hellraiser I think is a great watchable, really terrifying movie that closer to call than I think is for the rest of you guys. But I'm gonna have to painfully say goodbye to Hellraiser in round one here.
All right, Johnny, are you gonna make this interesting and potentially set this up for a 2-2, or are you just gonna send Hellraiser back to hell?
Now, the only thing that's tough with this for me, Psycho's my second favorite movie of all time behind Jaws, which, by the way, Jaws is not on this list because that's a thriller more so than an actual horror movie. We didn't really count that. Um, Psycho, you could say similar things about nowadays, but at the time it came out, it was definitely a horror movie. It definitely scared people. People were nervous to take showers and stuff like that. Hellraiser, having just recently in the last week watched both the first and second Hellraiser movies, it's something that grows stronger with age, like with like your age. Like I watched it when I was a kid and I thought, oh, the Cenobites are cool, I like this movie. Frank is scary, he's got like this creepy bodysuit, like Tristan mentioned with the body horror. It's got a lot of awesome elements, and then thematically, like you kind of grow up and you're like, oh, it's about the balance of pain and pleasure. It's kind of a commentary on horror movies in general, like that, seeking the pain and pleasure and the balance of the two. The Cenobites are, they have the balance of pain and pleasure, and that's what people are seeking to, with the box. I think the first two Hellraiser movies are both uh, great movies. It's another reason, like Hellraiser, you see on here, but we're not going to talk about Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street because I think both the first two Hellraiser movies are stronger movies than anything in those franchises, even though as a franchise, Hellraiser fell off very quickly after the second one. But at the end of the day, even though Hellraiser is a scarier film, Psycho is it's a much better film. It's super iconic. It scared people at the time. It's a movie that I revisit as often as I can, um, and it's my second favorite movie of all time. Not just horror movie, just movies in general. So that's a hard one for me to put aside the, some aspects and things like that. But yeah, Psycho, I'm sending it through with its third vote for sure.
All right, which means Hellraiser advances to round two, and that
Psycho,
and
not Hellraiser.
Yeah,
I
not
typed in
Hellraiser. Yeah.
Hellraiser. I don't know why. I need to. I don't know.
Joe's giving a real
Yeah.
upset.
Oh,
Yeah.
Joe said, I
Joe's
don't need
vote.
your
Joe.
votes.
Yeah.
I'm going Hellraiser. Also, please, I think it's legendary, or if they're even still around, they own the rights to Hellraiser, and they keep making crappy movies every couple of years because they just want to keep the rights to it. Please just let that go so we can get a real like Hellraiser remake, because I think you could do an awesome Hellraiser movie nowadays. But the reason we haven't gotten that for so long is because one studio that only hangs on the balance of its straight to DVD Hellraiser movie sales is just making crappy movies every couple of years. But you could do an awesome Hellraiser movie now, and that might be something you guys hear in a couple of weeks when Joe and I face each other and have to pitch new versions of Hellraiser.
I agree, it'd be a great remake. That's probably why it was picked for the list of movies to be remade on the Movie Changeup
Yeah.
podcast.
All right, and that means we finish off the bottom left corner of our bracket, or at least for the first round, and we move over to the top right corner, where we have Halloween in the number 2 seed. That would be the original from 1978. We have Malignant from 2021, Evil Dead 2 from 1987, The Thing from 1982, The Blair Witch Project from 1999, The Exorcist from 1973, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. And so our first matchup, Malignant, like I said, 2021, directed by James Wan. And the plot is Madison is paralyzed by shocking visions of grisly murders, and her torment worsens as she discovers that these walking dreams are in fact terrifying realities. And then Evil Dead 2 from 1987, directed by Sam Raimi. The lone survivor of an onslaught of flesh-possessing spirits holes up in a cabin with a group of strangers while the demons continue their attack. And, Johnny, where would your vote go between these two?
I'll say this. Malignant is the newest movie on our list, by the way. But yeah, Evil Dead 2, the first time I watched it, I didn't understand it at all because I had just watched Evil Dead, and then I put on Evil Dead 2 because I bought the box set of the movies. And I had never heard that Evil Dead 2 is just basically the
Evil Dead
higher budget remake of the first movie, and I had no idea what was going on the entire time because I'm like, I just saw all of this happen. What? Like, I don't get it. Then I learned that everything about it in the behind the scenes, and I've read about it, but since then I've never rewatched Evil Dead 2. I've just liked it more in hindsight because of stuff I've read about it. I really need to check it out. I think it'll blow me away like the second time I watch it based on seeing the first two and actually knowing what I'm going into with Evil Dead 2 now. That's going to be a movie I watch in the next few days because I've been on a kick of horror movies. Malignant, I watched pretty soon after it came out. James Wan's very hit or miss. People seem to like Malignant. They're very hit or miss on the movie. I don't get it. I think it's like laughably bad in most aspects of it. So much so that they almost immediately did an episode of How Did This Get Made about it. And I agree with a lot of the sentiments that they say on that podcast of there are definitely elements here, but overall there's so many plot holes in this movie that it all altogether falls apart. There are some elements that are like, oh, that's kind of cool, but there's nothing that new or unique. There's one fun reveal in the movie that makes it all worth watching, but it's a very just B movie with full plot holes that doesn't hold up in 2021, and it came out this year. So Evil Dead 2, even though I had seen it and it confused me, definitely gets the win here because Malignant, it just confused me that people enjoyed this one as much as they did. So if that doesn't tell you that I wasn't the one to push for this to be the 15th seed out of 24 movies on our bracket of the all-time greatest horror movies, I'm very confused by that, but I'm very interested to hear. I think two of our four panel defend Malignant and justify why it even made it on this list. So yeah, Evil Dead 2 blows Malignant out of the water. And I'm interested to hear what everyone else has to say about that.
All right, I feel like Tristan that he was calling one of us out, so I'm gonna go to you and see what your thoughts are on these two.
All right, yeah, Evil Dead 2. It's a big budget, awesome remake version of the first Evil Dead, and I mentioned at the beginning that I'm thinking Evil Dead 2 could be kind of on a run, I think, but look, I was blown away by Malignant. I thought it was awesome. Like, James Wan's been working in this really boring, dry, shitty studio climate of horror movies that suck ass, making Conjuring movies after Conjuring movies that are just boring, dry, fucking gray, nothing movies. Like, you watch me walk out, you're like, well, that sucked. And then I thought, oh, James Wan's just like this hack studio director now. You know, he made Aquaman that was like a fine, fun DC movie, but nothing that blew me away. And then suddenly he makes Malignant, and it's like this insane blast of fun and style. And it's like, sure, there's plot holes, but he's tributing movies like Evil Dead 2. Like, Evil Dead 2's plot doesn't make sense. Like, Evil Dead 2's not trying to make sense. It's just trying to be fun and cool and have a bunch of really zany, ridiculous effects.
It's trying
to
make
fun.
Dollars.
And Malignant is like exactly the same vein of Evil Dead 2. Like, it's horror to the max. It's just like I love that Malignant tributes all kinds of eras of horror. Like, it has that beginning where it's like this really campy VHS tape kind of opening sequence. It immediately sets you up for like, you're in for something goofy. You're in for something fun. And I think this has the idea of like, you're walking into Blockbuster, picking off a VHS off the shelf, putting it in. You're like, I don't know what this is. It's called Malignant. It has this crazy looking guy coming out of the head on the title, on the cover. I don't know what's going on. So you put it in and you watch it and you get this ridiculous, crazy movie. This movie has no right coming out in 2021. Like you said, it says not work in 2020, 2021, and yet somehow it came out in 2021. And as of now, it's my favorite movie of the year. So, you know
crazy.
what? I loved Evil Dead 2, and I know I said at the beginning that I wanted Evil Dead 2 to win, but I'm going to tribute Malignant here. Johnny talked his shit, but you know what? No, I'm good. Malignant, you win. Malignant gets a point here.
Just a
In
quick
spite.
behind the scenes here of Tristan's list. Malignant not on it. And Evil Dead 2, his 9th greatest horror movie of all time. But somehow Malignant, just because of my passion behind not liking it, Tristan gives it the upset. So I'm interested here in 2 reasons, because I don't know if Bobby's ever seen Malignant, and I don't know if Joe's ever seen Evil Dead 2.
I've seen both.
Okay,
Right,
Bobby's
so
seen both, which is
I'll
good.
go first. I'll say
Okay.
this. I watched Malignant on HBO Max like the day it came out. Thought it was amazing.
Joe's 5th best horror movie ever made.
Everything
Malignant.
Johnny said, I disagree with. Plot hole. I don't care about plot holes. There was a weird chick doing backwards Matrix style fighting, and or John Wick style fighting, and that was enough for me. I like the practical effects of it all. I like the reveal. I watched Evil Dead 2 at a truck stop and thought it was okay. I liked what they were going for, but it was... maybe I wasn't in the mood for it. Maybe it wasn't the best time. But...
That's honestly not the worst place to watch Evil Dead 2.
Yeah,
for
it's really
me-
not.
It makes
It's
sense.
the aesthetic,
Yeah.
I think.
But
Yeah.
for me, the movie I had more fun with and enjoyed more was Malignant, so that gets my vote. So now it comes down to Bobby to either make this a 2-2, and now we gotta have a conversation, or it can send Evil Dead 2 off into the distance.
All right. Well, to start, I did see *Malignant*, Johnny, and I liked it quite a bit. I think it's
God.
it's a movie that you are either on board with what it's trying to do right off the bat, or you're going to be out and then maybe enjoy the craziness of the ending. And I get it. I kind of recognized what it was going for right away and followed the ride, and then the ending just kind of amped it up. And it's the problem for me is that it does drag a little bit in like the beginning, like the second act. There's that kind of investigating kind of stuff going on, and it's really that didn't really hold my interest. And there's a lot of plot holes in that time that kind of bog it down a little bit until you get to the third act. That is amazing. I really do love the third act of the
It's
movie.
an 11 out of 10 third act.
Yeah, right. But it doesn't even come close to Evil Dead 2. Like, not even close. Like, there's no way. I had
Thank
fun
you
with
for
it.
having some
I
sense.
had fun with *Malignant*, and the ending is good. But Evil Dead 2, Bruce Campbell's amazing. That movie is just a whole lot of fun. And it all the way through, it's a way more enjoyable watch than *Malignant*, which has a very long stretch of kind of not much that interests you, and then like the craziness of the ending and all that stuff. So I'm gonna go with *Evil Dead 2*, and it's not close.
I will say I would have had a lot more fun with *Malignant* if the really super bland detective wasn't in the movie, because he was the worst part, as you kind of said.
Yeah.
Every time he was on screen, I was like, I'm ready to turn this movie off. But I love the lead actress and her sister, and if they had those two focused on more and had the sister in the princess outfit the whole time, I think this movie would have really done it for me. But just like so much of it, just everything outside of those main 2 characters, everything else they did just dragged it down too much for me. Evil Dead is like, even though I was confused, I was still having a blast from the moment I started to the moment it ended, and I was just like in this confused watch of, I don't know how this is a sequel to the first movie I just watched. But yeah. So Tristan, I'm offering you one last chance here.
Tristan, don't concede. Hold the line,
Look, all right, I'll speak my mind at this point, and I think we talked earlier about like Candyman versus Us, and like you don't get Us if you don't have Candyman to influence Jordan Peele to make Us, and I when I come to a tie-breaking moment like that, that's how I kind of go. I like to think back, like, okay, like erase one of these movies, and what do we get? Like, if Malignant never comes out, like, sure, 2021 collapses into apocalyptic void, and we all, the world ends because we haven't been treated to Malignant. But is cinema really impacted that much? And I think if you remove Evil Dead 2 from horror pantheon forever, like you don't get Malignant at all, and Malignant very much intentionally feels like James Wan loved Evil Dead 2 and movies just like Evil Dead 2 and wanted to do a 2021 tribute to those movies and really do like a total B movie to the max in 2021, and I love it for that. But Evil Dead 2 is the original B movie. Not the original, but it's like the one that.
No, Jerry Seinfeld made the original B movie.
that should be on this list, I think, of the best horror movies. But
yeah. I mean, a bee does have a relationship with a human, so
So I'm going to propose to Joe maybe that I change my vote just on the legacy of it here, and that Evil Dead. If you love Malignant, maybe go back and give Evil Dead 2 a second chance, because I think what you loved about Malignant, you might like about Evil Dead 2 as well.
Y'all are lame.
All right, Joe, maybe we'll check out Army of Darkness and then go back and watch Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, three of us.
Because when I watched Army of Darkness after seeing Evil Dead 2 and then read about what Evil Dead 2 was, I was like, oh yeah, on board. The first Evil Dead can kick rocks. It's only Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness and Ash versus the Evil Dead that exist in this franchise.
I made the opposite mistake of Johnny, I think, or I watched Evil Dead and then I said, oh, Army of Darkness, that's the sequel, right? And I watched that and I was like, what is going on in this movie? I have no idea how we got here or what's happening.
It's a very confusing franchise.
Evil Dead 2 was the first one I saw. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm on board. And then I read about what Evil Dead was and went and watched that one.
All right.
Made a lot more sense.
That was a big fight for a movie that's just going to lose to Halloween next.
Yeah. You ready for our next matchup?
Yeah.
Another rough one.
We have The Thing from 1982, directed by John Carpenter. It's about a research team in Antarctica who is hunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. And that is going up against The Blair Witch Project from 1999, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. 3 film students vanish after traveling into a Maryland forest to film a documentary on the local Blair Witch legend, leaving only their footage behind. And let's start with Tristan on this.
Yeah, Blair Witch, definitely a low tier one on here. I think it might be our lowest ranking, or one of the lowest on here. But for me, it's definitely an iconic one that I wanted to throw some love to. I have the DVD here. This one's kind of like lasted for a while in my life. Between the VHS and between this, me and my family went camping all the time. So I think that's kind of why this hit for me so much harder than for other people, because I've been out there in the woods and alone at night with no one around, and you kind of get those chills of like, oh, what would be happening if something was out here right now, or if there was some kind of monster, or some kind of witch, or anything out here in the woods. And it was kind of a tradition before we went camping. The night before, we'd watch the Blair Witch Project just to get ourselves spooked out before we went out into the woods. So I have a lot of nostalgia for this, and I also think it has a lot of impact on. It's not the first found footage movie, but it's like a watershed moment of found footage movies, and people always kind of cite back this for not just found footage, but for like the viral marketing element of it too, and like Cloverfield and those kind of movies that came about because of like the viral marketing online, and this had that, and people were literally believing it at that point. They were watching the TV specials that were going on, like they had a whole TV documentary about these people who went missing, and all of that was done to market this movie. So I want to give it props for putting in that extra effort, especially like in 1999. It feels like a turning point of like new technology coming into the marketing landscape. So I love Blair Witch Project, but I mean, it's a thing. So we're going to talk about The Thing in more detail as we get into further fights, but I wanted to throw some love to Blair Witch Project. The Thing has incredible effects, really great performances, a really iconic story and location. So I'm going to give the win to The Thing here. We'll fight about it more in a bit, but I love you, Blair Witch Project.
All right. Bobby, where are you at between The Thing and the Blair Witch Project?
Yeah, I mean, look, I completely get why the Blair Witch Project would be on a list like this. It just pop culturally made a very big impact, but it doesn't really, especially because of all of the found footage movies that came after it. It doesn't really hold up to go back and watch it. To me, I think it was very, very much of its time. It's like you said with the viral marketing, everyone thinking it was real. That created a very good theater experience at the time, but it to me it's very difficult to watch now and get any enjoyment out of. So and The Thing to me is just a classic. I love The Thing, like you said. Well, like I think this one's gonna go a lot further into the bracket, so we can talk a little bit more. But between the performances, the directing, the and everything of this movie, I don't think this one's close as far as which movie is better. If you want to talk movie impact and pop culture impact, like yeah, maybe Blair Witch has a like it has a way to maybe win, but I don't think it's close. I'm going to go with The Thing.
All right. And Johnny, where you at?
All right, I'm going to take you on a quick little journey here. When I was 12 years old, I used to hang out with my friend Mike every week, 2 or 3 times a week. Every single time we hung out, we would walk across the train tracks, cut through, and go to the China Crown restaurant and order each a quart of egg drop soup, which we would just drink out of the quart container like psychopaths. But we would order that. Then we'd go to Blockbuster, which was next door, and we'd rent a horror movie. So we rented Blair Witch Project one day, come back, get our soup, drink it on a blistering hot summer day, drinking soup out of a plastic quart container, walk back to the house. We go to stay, and I'm like, what is this movie? And he's like, oh, it's this documentary, like it's this real movie. I had never heard of it before. He said it was real. So we watched it, and I'm thinking the whole time, like, I don't really get what's going on. Then the end happens, and I'm like, that's crazy. That movie was real? Like, that blew my mind. And then he told me it was fake, and I said, oh, then that movie sucked. And I tried rewatching it one time after knowing everything about it, and it does suck. It's a very bad movie. It was a gimmick at the time, and that is why it was popular. It was a very successful gimmick. It's not a well-made movie. It doesn't have any likable characters in it. The ending is only interesting if you think it's real going into it, which at the time when it came out, it did. So the payoff to that was in high school when Paranormal Activity came out. My same friend Mike and I convinced our buddy Nick that Paranormal Activity was a real movie and a documentary. So we went to see that, and he got his mind blown, and he went home and was like telling his parents how crazy, like, oh my God, ghosts are real. This movie's real. And then we had to, break the news to him one day. So it all paid off. I have a lot of fun with Blair Witch Project only because of my experience watching it and then later doing the same thing to someone else for a much less believable movie, but I had a very gullible friend at the time. But yeah, the Blair Witch Project is not a very well-made movie. The Thing, though, however, I just watched from start to finish for the first time last night, and I think it's like a 4 out of 5 star movie. I was blown away by all the special effects in it. They still hold up so amazingly well. Every single practical effect, all the creature designs. It's the best dog performance you'll ever see in a movie. That dog should have won an Oscar. That husky. It's crazy how, like, I have a dog now, and I'm like, I wish he could be half as well trained as this husky that walks into that's like super calm with all these crying dogs around it, and does whatever it was told to do. And the biggest horror of this movie, though, is just that lack of trust between these people, and I think that is such an amazing story to tell, and it works so effectively. So yeah, The Thing is an incredible movie. The Blair Witch Project made for a fun watch when I was 12 years old, and then immediately realized that movie was terrible as soon as I knew the gimmick about it. And that still kind of holds up for me of like what I always think about the Blair Witch Project. So I'm going to go with The Thing here. I watched it to complete, to have seen every movie on this list. I watched The Thing last night and loved it. So I'm sending The Thing through. So that was a tangent, but I thought it was a story worth telling.
All right. Well, either way, The Thing advances. Clean sweep. So that brings us to our final matchup. where we have The Exorcist from 1973 versus the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from the following year. So, Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. It's about a 12-year-old girl who is possessed by a mysterious entity and her mother who seeks the help of two priests to save her. Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, directed by Toby Hooper. 5 friends head out to rural Texas to visit the grave of a grandfather. On the way, they stumble across what appears to be a deserted house, only to discover something sinister within, something armed with a chainsaw. And with that, I'm going to start with Tristan. Where is your vote going?
This is a rough one because The Exorcist, of course, is like an all-time great, not just horror movie, but I would argue that it's one of the best just dramas of all time. William Friedkin directed the hell out of it, but I do want to mention Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Johnny, when we talked about Hellraiser, mentioned how Friday the 13th and those kind of movies didn't really make it into this list because while they have the whole franchises do have some like highs and lows moments I liked, it didn't necessarily, no individual movie stuck out as one of the all-time best. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think, embodies that in a way of like that low-budget 70s cult movie that was made on like a shoestring budget, and it was really pushing the boundaries, and it was like you don't care about the characters really, you don't care about the plot really, you're watching it because it's terrifying and it's building tension, and all of the kills are just really hard to watch, and I love it as well because it has it's bloodless, it is not gory, you're not seeing limbs chopped off or anything like that, and I think it gets props for being such a bloodless, such horror movie that is still terrifying to watch. And the director was trying to go for a PG rating when it came out because he said, "Oh look, there's no violence, there's no gore, there's no this and that." But of course they're like, "Nah, dude, this is terrifying. You're getting an R rating." So I like it because it is that kind of cult B movie kind of edge that I think horror thrives on. You know, these movies that come out that are made for $100 and then make millions off of them, and it's hard to compare that kind of movie to The Exorcist. That's like an Oscar caliber actual movie from like Oscar winning directors. For me though, I do have to give the win to The Exorcist. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it a handful of times, and I do think the scares do hold up, and I think it's very terrifying. And it's not just scary; it also has some really great craft. So it's going to be an interesting one to debate as we get further along. But I do love Texas Chainsaw Massacre as an embodiment of that kind of 70s exploitation horror. But for me, The Exorcist is just like a mind-blowingly good movie.
All right, Johnny, where are you leaning with these two classic films?
This one's tough because we kind of mentioned in our group chat, and I sent this out. I said, The Exorcist is the greatest and most influential possession movie of all time. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre might be the most influential slasher movie of all time. This led to all of those other slasher movies you love, like Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare, and all those things don't really, you don't know for sure, but they might not exist without Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This movie was something I watched when I was way too young to see it, and always grew up thinking like, oh, that's one of the most violent movies ever made. And then having rewatched it within the last week, I was like, this movie has like almost no gore, but it's still terrifying. And then, read more about it, that the director was going for, a PG rating and everything Tristan said. It was made on such a low budget that all of the actors had to wear the same like filthy outfits the whole time because they didn't have a budget for costumes. And it is still a movie that holds up to this day. The Exorcist is a better movie. It's a more well-made film, but I picture it more of a drama because there's not one thing in the movie that is scary to me, and I've never really felt that way. It is a horror movie, so I, classify it as that, and, my list of the top 50 horror movies of all time is going to be, near the top of that list, but it's not scary. I'm not a religious person, never have been. I tend to go more towards movies that can actually happen. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's a fucked up family that wants to murder you. That could actually happen. The Exorcist, nothing in that movie could actually happen. There's no demon possessions in real life. All exorcisms are bullshit, scandal, crap. And for that reason, even though The Exorcist is a better made movie, I think the better horror movie is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, having just watched it. I'm going to give my win to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that might be the only win it gets here, but I think it's just a much better horror movie. The Exorcist is a good drama, super well acted, well directed, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an actual horror movie and one of the best slasher movies ever made. So I give it to that.
All right, and Bobby, I'm going to go to you. And since I have not seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you have the deciding vote.
Okay. Uh, so this is a tough one, even though. So to be frank, when I made my list, The Exorcist was on it in the bottom half, I believe, and then Texas Chainsaw Massacre was not. But I do agree that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a much scarier movie. So if you're going to go based on just the horror factor, you could definitely go with that, even though, like you said, it is bloodless. But I don't think I can go against The Exorcist. I think it's one of the most influential movies ever made. It's very, very well done. It is. I think it is scary in some elements, even if you don't believe in, a lot of the religious aspects of the movie. And it still has visually some of the best horror kind of what you picture from a horror movie. A lot of those iconic moments. And it is just a better overall movie. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a much scarier watch, and maybe if you're in the mood to watch a horror movie with friends and something, you're gonna put something on that's just gonna scare people. I think that is definitely what it is. The Exorcist, though, I think is just too much of a Oscar caliber movie, well-made movie to kind of to pass it up at this point. So even though I do like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm gonna go with The Exorcist here.
All right, and
Fair.
that means The Exorcist is the final movie to advance in the top right corner bracket. And with that, spell Exorcist wrong. There we go. So that means The Exorcist advances, and these are our movies in the final corner, the bottom right corner. We have It Chapter 1 from 2017 in the third seed. We have Midsummer from 2019 in the 14 seed. We have Gremlins from 1984 in the 19 seed. Then our next matchup, we have Suspiria from 1977 going up against A Quiet Place from 2018. And then on our final matchup of the first round, we have Train to Busan from 2016 going up against Poltergeist from 1982. So, with that, let me read off our first description, which will be Midsummer versus Gremlins, which should be an interesting matchup because I think you have two. I don't know if we've ever had a matchup between two more different movies on this list in the first round. So, Midsummer 2019, directed by Ari Aster. A couple travels to Scandinavia to visit a rural hometown's fabled Swedish Midsummer Festival. What begins as an idyllic retreat quickly devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult. And then you have Gremlins from 1984, directed by Joe Dante. A young man inadvertently breaks 3 important rules concerning his new pet and unleashes a horde of malevolently mischievous monsters on a small town. I will start this off, and I will say, even as I'm talking now, I don't really know where my vote's going to go. I would say Gremlins has the iconicness. Everyone knows Gremlins. It's a well-made classic 80s movies. I think one of the things that will hold it back is it's a little bit more family-friendly, where if it leaned more into the horror, I think it would be an easier vote. But because it's more of like a PG-13 style horror movie, it's not as easy to vote for. Where Midsummer is, I would not feel comfortable showing that movie to anyone like under 18 without feeling like I could, not mentally scar them. It's very graphic, very messed up, and I think I'm gonna surprise myself here and say that I think, based on quality of the movie alone, and it's hard to say Midsummer's not iconic because it's so new. It's only 2 years old, where we don't really know where it'll be in the horror landscape, 15, 20 years from now compared to Gremlins. So I can't really hold that against it. And with that, I think my vote will be for Midsummer. And Johnny, you at one point had a dog named Gizmo named after one of the characters from Gremlins. So I'm curious to see where your vote would go.
I grew up, as Bobby mentioned, we grew up watching Gremlins. I've seen the movie 50 times. It's a great movie. It's more of a comedy in my mind, and I think that's what the new batch did well, of recognizing what genre Gremlins should be and kind of steering towards that. So as much as I love Gremlins, it's got some scary elements, like the actual Gremlins themselves and their transformation is pretty creepy. Stripe is creepy, but I think they just really, really nailed what they were going for with the new batch. That it kind of hinders Gremlins as a first movie, because if I'm going to revisit the franchise, it's going to be a new batch before the original Gremlins. Midsummer, I wasn't as high on Hereditary as most people were. And then I watched Midsummer, and now I think Ari Aster is the best horror director working today. I think Midsummer is a masterpiece. It's my 21st ranked movie of the decade. And I think that it's just going to keep climbing the more times I watch it. I've seen it twice now. It was an immediate rewatch. Like, I watched it once and had to see what I saw again pretty close afterwards. I think Midsummer is arguably the best movie that's come out in the last like 20, 30 years. I think it's incredible. I love some of the other movies on this list, but Midsummer is one that I think could really make a run. And I said I was going to fight hard for. Gremlins is more nostalgic, but Midsummer is a movie that immediately I recognize the greatness, and upon second viewing was like, yeah, this is a total masterpiece from start to finish. It's scary. It makes you uneasy. It has some mystery elements in it. It has amazing direction, incredible acting. It doesn't have some weird story about your dad trying to be Santa and going down a chimney and breaking his neck. That really threw me off as a child. But yeah, I think Gremlins is fun, and it's a good movie, and it's something that you can throw on at any time. But Midsummer is like one of the greatest horror movies I have ever seen. So Midsummer, easy win for me.
All right, Bobby, I'm going to go to you to see if you can maybe make this interesting.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Because like Johnny said, look, I've seen Gremlins a million times. It's one of my favorite movies as a kid, like growing up and watching. And Midsummer is a phenomenally made movie. It is very scary. It is very graphic. The direction it's masterful directing, but I do personally like Hereditary more. But there's no way to me that I can make Gremlins get swept out of there. So Gremlins is a endlessly rewatchable movie. It has characters created with Gizmo and Stripe as far as creature design, and even just a cute, cuddly design with Gizmo that have lasted throughout the years and decades since it came out. Even with the comedy aspect being in there, and it is more family friendly, to me, it is endlessly rewatchable. And it is way like, Midsummer. What? Midsummer is
Midsummer is not.
Midsummer
like
is
one of the hardest movies to watch.
One of the hardest movies to watch, and it does what it does extremely well. It is very well made. It executes what it is going for to a T. But that movie is not for everybody, and I think Gremlins is. And
Unless
sometimes
you believe in Santa Claus,
right? And I think sometimes that's that it shouldn't affect anything, and But to me, Gremlins is a way more rewatchable movie. I would rather put that movie on, even if it's not as scary. And I'd rather, if I'm going to put an Ari Aster film on this list, it would have been Hereditary. So I'm going to go with Gremlins because I just can't have it be swept out of here, and it's a very close call.
All right, Tristan, where are you going?
Unlike some of the people on this podcast, I don't have a lot of nostalgia for Gremlins because I didn't watch it until just a couple of years ago for the first time, and it was one of those movies where I thought, it's like a kids movie, I'm like, I'm sure I won't like it because I don't have the nostalgia for it, and there's movies like that where it's like, I can respect that people liked it when they were kids, but when you watch it as an adult, it's just not going to hit you the same way that it would if you watch it when you're a kid, and I assume that's what Gremlins would be, but I went into it and I was really surprised by how much I liked it. I don't necessarily think I was scared by it. I don't know, it wasn't like a it's hard to compare these two movies to each other. They're going for like completely different sides of horror, like almost like a polar opposite veins of what horror can be, and Gremlins is kind of very, very on the fun side of horror, and I love the creature effects. I've talked a lot about how much I love practical effects, especially in horror. I think horror is a genre that shines in the practical effects and the creatures, and Gremlins has really iconic creatures and effects, and I think the fact that that creature Gizmo could last as an iconic character within the horror, even though he came from this not particularly horrifying movie that you would not necessarily even, some people would call it a family movie, not even call it a horror movie, and the fact that it's lasted among the horror movie greats. And yeah, New Batch I haven't seen, so I'm planning on getting around to that at some point because I've heard people love it and say it's like going for what Gremlins went for, but better. So I think what Johnny kind of praised it a lot this episode, so I'm gonna want to check it out pretty soon. But for me, Gremlins has that iconography, but Midsummer is terrifying. I walked out of it just shook, and like I remember there's so many moments in that movie that impacted me and just like hit me so hard. The opening sequence of like her realization of what's happening to her parents and her sister is we're so drawn out and so deliberately paced, and it's like you feel it tensing and tensing, and you're like, oh my god, I can't believe this is what's happening, and it's just like that hangs through the whole entire movie, and you feel that as you're watching it, and that's the kind of if you want to go for that tone this movie's going to give you, like you feel this dread and awful the whole time you're watching it. And Gremlins is like you're going to feel awesome, and it's going to like a holiday movie about family fun. So it's like, do you want to feel fun or do you want to feel absolutely terrible? So for me, when I go to horror movies, I want to feel terrible. So I'm going for Midsommar.
All right. So that means Midsummer advances to the next round. And let's see if I can spell this movie right this time. Alright. And that means our next matchup, we have Suspiria from 1977 and A Quiet Place from 2018. And I gotta do some moving real quick. Alright. Give me just a second. Alright, Suspiria from 1977, directed by Dario Argento. It's about an American newcomer to a prestigious German ballet academy who comes to realize that the school is a front for something sinister amid a series of grisly murders. Then we have A Quiet Place from 2018, directed by John Krasinski. In a post-apocalyptic world, a family is forced to live in silence while hiding from monsters with ultra-sensitive hearing. Johnny, I know you've seen both of these. Where are you going?
Yeah, I had never seen Suspiria, and then Tristan had it really high on his list, so that was like my motivation to finally check it out. It's one of those movies that's been on a watch list of mine for probably a decade. And it's never really been anywhere. It's never like I've never come across it, so I seeked it out. I watched it, and I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's definitely not a movie for everyone. You have to be a super hardcore film fan, I think, to enjoy it. And see a lot of elements of like you have to understand the time you're in. I think it helped me that I had been watching a lot of like 70s horror movies at the time I watched it to kind of get in that mind frame. That being said, outside of like a super terrifying scene involving a dog, and the end, which I think is bonkers, bananas fun, it doesn't necessarily hold up. It's super low budget, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't think it's to that extent. But even when you watch both films, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a scene where, the guy is in their van and cuts someone, and it looks real. In Suspiria, it's like the most laughably bad gore you'll ever see in a movie. It's literally just like red paint. And that takes you out of it a little bit watching it, even like for the time it came out. But I have a lot of love for it. I wish I watched it earlier and had more experience rewatching it, because then I think I'd have more of an argument for it rather than just I watched it once, didn't really know what to think going into it. A Quiet Place was one of the best theater experiences I think I've ever had. It was just, and that is such an important thing for a horror movie. Like it's fun to be able to rewatch a horror movie, but when you get that feeling of everyone in that theater, not one person wants to make a sound, and it does such a great job of that during it. I think A Quiet Place is just altogether a scarier film, and I don't discredit Suspiria for that. It's just the times have changed and the scares have changed now, and it's a little more updated and modern. Obviously, coming out 40 years later, A Quiet Place just that's the movie that I'd throw on. We've kind of mentioned, like, if you're watching a horror movie and you have friends over and you want to give them a scare, you're going to put on A Quiet Place and no one's going to make a peep and everyone's going to be glued to the screen from start to finish. If you have people that aren't like hardcore film fans and you throw on Suspiria, they're going to be like, what the hell am I watching? It has really, really bad dubbing, which the whole time just made me question Tristan's on Her Majesty's Secret Service hate for the dubbing, because that's done so much better than anything in Suspiria. But I will say, outside of the worst dubbing I've ever seen and the worst gore I've ever seen, Suspiria is super fun. I highly recommend it if you're a film fan, and if you want to, and you're kind of a completionist with influential horror movies, definitely watch it. I'm happy I watched it, but A Quiet Place, I can't replace that theater experience I had watching it. It's just one of the most fun times, like being scared, but having just so much fun watching A Quiet Place. So I think A Quiet Place, even though it's probably far less influential, even though there's been like 5 copies of it in like 3 years since it came out, I think A Quiet Place is just a far superior movie, and I only credit that to it coming out nowadays compared to being a low budget 1970s Italian movie that probably didn't have much backing behind it. But I like Suspiria. I recommend it to both Bobby and Joe, and I'd be interested to see what you guys think of it if you haven't watched it. But I think I'm going to go Quiet Place.
All right. And Tristan, did I ask you yet?
No, I haven't. I haven't given my choice yet,
It's
Joe.
only been Johnny.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, my brain don't work a lot of times. You try having like 20 concussions and then trying to remember shit, okay?
I've had 3.
So for me, Johnny mentioned Suspiria is very high on my list, and it's one that is kind of like an all-time favorite movie for me. I've watched it. I couldn't even tell you how many times I've watched it, and I think 2 Halloweens ago it came back in theaters around October for a weekend or something, and I watched it 3 times in 2 days because I was like, this is my one opportunity to see this crazy Italian movie in theaters, so I'm gonna like consume it as much as possible. So yeah, I watched it 3 times in a 2-day span. It's one of my favorites. It really visually fantastic, and like Johnny mentioned, the dubbing is kind of bad and the effects are kind of bad, but when you're in this kind of genre of giallo films and you're not really going for like realism, you're mostly going for like the style and the visual and like kind of like throwing you into this kind of surreal world. If you watched Last Night in Soho, this movie in particular, along with a lot of movies similar to it, were very directly influenced or very direct influences for that movie. And the way it's just Last Night in Soho had the really bright red lights and kind of like very like bright world that she was living in, and kind of like the surreal world, like moving between dreams and reality. You're not quite sure what's real and what's not. And Suspiria is a huge influence in that kind of a movie. And I highly recommend it if you like just visual spectacle movies. Johnny calls it like a film school type movie, but it's not like a dry, slow, like Nosferatu kind of film school movie. It's very much like you're getting an abundance of style and color film school movie. So it's on the opposite pole of that. For me, I saw A Quiet Place and everyone was like, oh man, you got to watch Quiet Place. It's so good. And John Krasinski, he's going to be the next great horror director. It's so good. And then I watched it and I was like, all right, that was okay. I guess it was a solid, all right movie. I wasn't particularly scared by any of it. And I don't know, I wasn't super impressed by Quiet Place. It was good. And I know that a lot of people liked it. And like Johnny said, it's already influenced a bunch of copies. So I'm sure it's going to be one of those movies that everyone kind of looks back on and says, oh, here's like, Scream or similar to movies that we talked about before that are turning point movies. So I'm not going to protest too much if we get Quiet Place to win. But for me, Suspiria has the impact proven already. It's really incredible movie to watch. And I think it really has a lot of fun with its style and its tone. If you liked Malignant, I think you might like this as well. So if you like those kind of out there, all on their own movies that go for it, and 110%, I think you'd like Suspiria.
All right. Bobby, have you seen Suspiria?
I have not.
So that could be
but
a problem because neither have
right. I know, but I will say that I have it. It makes it tough because I may have been the only one to put A Quiet Place on the top 10 list.
I might have as well.
So we both did, I think, like Johnny said, it's one of the best theater experiences that I've had in a long time. You really remember certain movies that you get that theater experience with, and that one, like I had popcorn, I didn't want to eat it because it would make too much noise. Like it's crazy that a movie can have that effect. And this movie with its gimmick, which it is a gimmick that works. There are some movies where there's a gimmick and it's like, oh, it's 3D or it's whatever, and it doesn't work. Kind of like Bird Box tried to copy, even though it was an earlier book, or whatever, tried to copy A Quiet Place and have its own gimmick, and it doesn't work. A Quiet Place does, and it does make it scarier. It makes you really feel like you are in the movie, in that world. It created a world that is believable and that has rules and that is scary to live in. So even though I haven't seen Suspiria, I would fight pretty hard for A Quiet Place.
All right, so I looked it up. I did not have A Quiet Place on my list, but it would have been like my 12 or 13.
No, it was Bobby's number 10, and no one else had it on their list.
Yeah, it would have been my like 12 or 13. So
Suspiria was Tristan's 3, and it was not on anyone else's list because at the time no one else had seen it, and I watched it a few days ago.
So since we're tied, and me and Bobby both saw A Quiet Place and liked it, I feel like maybe if one of us saw it and didn't like it, but for the most part, all four of us saw A Quiet Place and liked it. And we've had, a combined 50 years between me and Bobby to watch Suspiria and haven't, and a combined like 6 years to watch A Quiet Place, and we both have. So I feel like it's only fair for essentially A Quiet Place to move on, unless anyone has.
And I think it's better for the conversation in the end, because what's the fun of putting a movie through that half the people haven't seen?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd go for Quiet Place,
100%.
honestly.
Yeah,
it'll make a better fight because we've all seen it.
Did you like the remake, Tristan?
At first, I was really put off by it because it's where the original is super bright and colorful. The remake is very intentionally not, and it's very intentionally dark and muddy and like the opposite of the original. And when I first watched it, I was like, well, that sucks. I wanted to see what they do with like a big budget where they can go all out and do these kind of really cool visuals. But I've come around and appreciated that it was very much sort of like an intentional subversion of that. Like he said, oh, what can we do that is stylistic, but like in a totally opposite way. So I respect it for that, and I'd like to revisit it, but it's hard to go against something that is just so incredibly different to then something that is just like very dark and cold and the opposite of the original thing.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious with someone. I've never really talked to anyone who's been a huge fan of the first one who has seen the remake. So I was curious about that.
Yeah, after seeing the first one, I want to check out the remake for sure. Suspiria, like I liked A Quiet Place a lot, but Suspiria, I think just for a first time watch for a low budget, obscure 70s movie, I had a lot of fun with it. Like Tristan said, it's like a film school movie because it has elements like if you know film, you like it more, you understand like, okay, this film's really going for the color red, and that's probably what the choice was, why the blood was so obscure looking, is because they wanted to make it just as red as they could. But it's also a fun movie from start to finish. Like you don't know what's going on for most of it. It's a mystery that you want to figure out with some horror in it. So, and like I would say if we did some like a bracket of horror scenes, I think if we did our top 28, the scene with the blind man and his dog might make it onto that bracket because I thought that scene was like incredible directing, and it built tension really well. So it definitely has elements. So I recommend it.
All right, and that brings us to our final matchup of round one, and that is the matchup of Train to Busan from 2016 versus Poltergeist from 1982. So, Train to Busan, directed by Sang-ho Yeon. While a zombie virus breaks out in South Korea, passengers struggle to survive on the train from Seoul to Busan. And then Poltergeist, 1982, directed by Toby, Steven Spielberg, Hooper. A family's home is haunted by a host of demonic ghosts. And I'll let Bobby kick this one off.
Yeah, this is interesting because Poltergeist is a classic. I grew up watching it. It's the very famous "They're Here" and all that. But I've never really found it scary. I find it a little bit more in the family-friendly horror aspect, which is kind of because everyone says that, as you put the air quotes around who directed the movie, that it was Spielberg that really did it, and it does have his fingerprints all over it. I think it's a very rewatchable movie, and I think that it definitely holds up as a like very influential movie, a classic movie, a very easy watch. But Train to Busan to me is a lot scarier, and I think it's very well done in the genre. I saw it once. I'm not the best person to speak on it. I think at least Johnny I know, and probably you guys have seen it more than me and know more about it. But I think Train to Busan puts you into a kind of claustrophobic kind of place that is very well done. It's very scary, very the characters, even though like you know enough about the characters to care about them in this situation, and I think it's like I would, in some aspects, I take a rewatchable movie like Gremlins, and I would kind of put it ahead of Midsummer, which is a very scary movie, but like it's hard to watch. Train to Busan is not hard to watch, but it is a very scary and well done movie, and it is entertaining. So I'm gonna go with Train to Busan on this one.
All right, and I will go. You know what? I'll just answer this one myself. I'll go to myself for this one. For me, Poltergeist is a movie about basically family dynamics where the poltergeist comes in and you see like Craig T. Nelson's character, the dad, and like the whole family and all their interactions and dynamics with them as their house is kind of like invaded by these ghosts and these demons. And Train to Busan is essentially still a similar thing of like this father and the daughter, and then you have this other character on the train with this expectant father and his girlfriend or wife or whatever it was, and while the zombies aren't attacking. And to me, I feel like the relationships are a lot more compelling and a lot more interesting and a lot more heartstring pulling in Train to Busan, and I feel like they get what they're going for a lot more in Train to Busan than Poltergeist. And I agree with Bobby. I think Train to Busan is a lot scarier in points than Poltergeist is, and so for me, I would have to go with Train to Busan as well. And with that, I will go to Tristan.
Yeah, Poltergeist is an all-time classic. I have the DVD here, and I love the DVD in particular because it has that kind of like iconic shot right there of her with the TV. And I always think of this as like a blockbuster kind of movie where you walk into the blockbuster video and you see that iconic shot, and you're like, oh, I that's Poltergeist. You recognize it immediately, and it has that iconography, and it has one of my favorite kind of low-budget scares in a horror movie where they're in the kitchen and she's sitting there at the kitchen table, and the mom is kind of like making dinner or whatever, and the camera just pans over to the mom and then pans back and into the room, and all of the chairs and everything else is flipped upside down and all over the place. And I thought it was really like a really cool camera move, and I really loved that moment of it's so simple, but like the scare of your things moving around in your house without you controlling it. And I love the simplicity of some of the scares in Poltergeist, where it's a haunted house movie that, at least for the beginning, it ramps up from like chairs moving around and things kind of feeling out of place in a relatable way, all the way to like this surreal traveling into the void craziness. So I think it's a really fun 80s movie and a classic in that way. But yeah, Train to Busan really pulled on my heartstrings and really hit me emotionally. And you would think it by 2016 the zombie genre was dead at that point, and I was like, Walking Dead has like simultaneously revived and then killed the zombie genre all by itself, and I don't feel like I need more of it. So Train to Busan came out and proved to me you can still do a good movie in the zombie genre. You can really pull at the family dynamics, like Joe said, and really have a character focus without having to spend all of the time like developing your characters. You know just enough about these characters to care, and it shows, because by the end, I feel like everyone who watches Train to Busan that has a heart is at least moved, if not crying, by the end of Train to Busan. So it does just minimal enough work to make you care. And Poltergeist is a lot of fun and a lot of really fun scenes and a lot of memorable moments. But Train to Busan is just a step above that for me.
All right, and so with that, Train to Busan does advance. But Johnny, I assume your vote would probably follow the same direction. But what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I just recently watched Poltergeist again, and like Bobby said, like it's known as more of a family-friendly one. Spielberg wanted to make it more of an extraterrestrial thing, but Toby Hooper actually had a lot of influence because he was the one that wanted to go more with the like kind of the ghost story. So I don't think people give Toby Hooper enough credit for his involvement in this film. They just say, oh, well, Spielberg directed it. So I'll give it a shout out for that. It has a lot of moments. It's definitely memorable scenes. But yeah, Train to Busan, just I'm not a fan of the zombie genre at all. I think The Walking Dead is one of the worst shows of all time, and I've never understood the popularity of it. But Train to Busan is like the only zombie movie I've ever seen that really stuck out to me and really made an impact on me and actually had me scared for the characters and didn't know how the movie would end, because every one just ends with them either finding a safe zone or they die and become zombies. And this one has a lot of tension throughout, and then even the ending, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, when they're walking through that tunnel, like, oh no, like, is this about to end tragically? So yeah, I'm going to go with Train to Busan as well. So that's a clean sweep for Train to Busan.
All right, and that brings us to our first matchup in the second round, and this should probably start going a little bit faster now that we've talked about each of these movies a little bit. Alright, let's see if I can figure this out. And of course, that's when it decides to not work anymore. Yay. Alright, there we go. First matchup in round 2. We have The Shining from 1980 versus Night of the Living Dead from 1968. Two classics. The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick. A family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter where a sinister presence influences the father into violence, while his psychic son sees horrifying forebodings from both past and future. Alright, and let's start with Bobby. Bobby, what are your thoughts on these two classics?
I think Johnny wanted to actually start because the dog was being a little fussy. But
well, we can go to Johnny.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me do this real quick because I got to take him out and hopefully get back by the next matchup, because he woke up and he was being so good before. Anyway, so The Shining is one of the greatest movies of all time. Night of the Living Dead is a super influential film, but it's definitely The Shining. You get the Here's Johnny. You get not only like the impact of Jack Torrance and everything involving like the horror of him, and then you get the finale of him terrorizing his family. So I think there's just so many layers to it, and it's super well acted. It's an Oscar-y type movie, even though I feel like it was kind of panned at the time it came out. Stephen King shit on it. People have come around and they understand that this is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Night of the Living Dead is super influential, but it doesn't have anything like we mentioned kind of scary. Like we just talked about a movie that took influence from it and Train to Busan and escalated that. The Shining, nothing's ever kind of escalated what The Shining did to the industry. So I'm going The Shining here for sure.
All right, and now that The Shining has a vote, Bobby, where is your vote?
Yeah, I don't know if this one's going to be particularly close for any of us, but just The Shining is one of the best movies ever made, not let alone just one of the best kind of horror movies. And I think just between the red rum, all work no play, like makes Johnny a dull boy. It has a lot of iconic moments and things that have stuck in pop culture. It holds up as a movie when you go back and watch it. It's scary. You watch the cabin fever type of madness that happens to Jack Torrance, and then you get the actual Shining element with Danny Torrance and all that. But it's a fantastic movie. Night of the Living Dead is good, and it is iconic in the zombie genre, but I'm not as big on that genre, and I don't think it holds up as a rewatch at this point in 2021 than going back and watching The Shining. So I'm going with The Shining as well.
All right, and Tristan, what about you?
I want to throw some love to Night of the Living Dead because I think it got what so much of the zombie genre after it never got, is that it was never really about the zombies. It was never really about like, oh, how crazy can you make these zombies? Like how violent can you make these zombie scenes? This movie was very much about, we're taking these people who are all these strangers and throwing them into a house together, and we're going to see how those dynamics are changed when you throw the escalation of death outside their door, and you had the black main character as a lead in the 1960s. It was right in the middle of the civil rights movement, and to have the black man take center and kind of be like the moral center of the entire group and not be some kind of like criminal, not be the deviant, he was the lead. He was the hero of this movie, and I think that was a big statement. And it was also a statement about kind of the divide of generations. You had the older people, the people who were kind of like seeing the world a little bit more conservatively and not necessarily seeing the problem as it is, and they had to be kind of like separated from the younger people who were like trying to see the reality and fight for something to change. And I think this has elements of the 60s civil rights movement within this movie a lot, especially in the ending, where if you haven't, I don't know if someone hasn't seen Night of the Living Dead at this point, but like, I think there's a lot of really stark imagery in the finale of Night of the Living Dead coming out in the 60s during such violent imagery of the civil rights movement on the screen. And when you see like the Selma March and the violence that was inflicted on marchers, and that, I think you can see that influence here on Night of the Living Dead. So I think Night of the Living Dead is really interesting in that way. But The Shining it's so beautifully crafted. It's like one of the all-time greatest movies. And I love the documentary about The Shining and how it has all of these theories of people who are like have all these crazy readings of it that are probably not intended by the author. But I think The Shining is one of those movies that embodies like the death of the author in a way where everyone has their kind of way of what it means and what it says. And I think it's always fun to talk about The Shining, what people think of what it's trying to say, what the favorite scenes are. And I can see in a way why Stephen King was disappointed by it in certain ways, but I think it is a fantastic movie as its own thing. And I've watched it so many times. I mean, I have the 4K right here. It's one of my favorite covers of a movie, and it's just a fantastic movie. So I'm going to have to give the win to The Shining, even though it was much, much closer for me than it was for you guys, I think. But I don't know where Joe's going. I don't think. Has Joe decided yet?
Well, if people haven't been paying attention, I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead, so Shining.
Well, there it is.
Technically,
is
The
good,
Shining
but...
won. I should have noticed that
Yeah.
after Johnny and Bobby both voted for The Shining, that The Shining technically already won. But
Yeah, I mean, look, Night of the Living Dead is iconic and it's great for what it did, and it does deserve a lot of credit for sure. But it's just The Shining is, I think, just one of the best movies, of all time. So I think that's kind of why it makes it over that.
all right, and while we are waiting for Johnny to come back, we can look over and see if there were any upsets in the first round. Let's see. We had no. Ooh, we had Candyman, a 20 seed, beat 13 seed Us,
Yep.
and we had 18 seed Evil Dead 2 take out 15 seed Malignant,
And A Quiet Place.
and let's see.
I was surprised
Oh
to see
yeah,
Dr. Sleep
22
beat
seed.
Nosferatu.
That's a big upset. 22, A Quiet Place beat out 11 seed Suspiria.
Even though Dr. Sleep was ranked higher than Nosferatu, I kind of expected Dr. Sleep to be eliminated in the first round just because I figured people would lean towards like the iconography of Nosferatu. So I was kind of surprised to see a sweep for Dr. Sleep, if I remember right. So that was, even though it wasn't technically an upset, it was a surprise for me on my bracket.
Yeah.
I thought it would get some votes, but I was a really big fan of Dr. Sleep, so I knew where I was going.
All right, and that means our next matchup of the evening is Alien 79 versus Scream from 96. And let's start with Tristan this time. Tristan, you have two iconic movies about 20 years apart. Who wins? Who goes home?
Yeah, this is hard for me because these are some of my favorites. I fight hard for Scream. It's one that I watch every year. Like Joe mentioned, Nosferatu is his go-to Halloween movie. For me, it's Scream. It's been Scream for a really long time. I think it embodies like the fun of what horror movies are. There've been horror comedies and before that, but I think Scream very much was like, we're going to directly take the beats of horror movies and kind of like parody them. But I think it doesn't get enough credit necessarily because even though it does parody the rules of horror movies, it also breaks them and doesn't just go beat for beat to the horror movies. I think that last act is so fantastically crafted. It's like a 40-minute chase sequence in one house, and like you feel the tension the entire time. And that whole time, it's like it's totally the rules that you think it's following. And then in that last act, it breaks them all. It's like, oh, there's two killers. The person you thought died on screen actually didn't die, and it kind of like pulls the rug out from under you. It introduces the rules in the first act, and then kind of like pulls them back and surprises you in that way that I think is really fun to watch. So I love Scream, but it's going to be hard to argue for it against some of the other because it's just like Scream is Scream is fun, but I don't necessarily think it has changed uh, changed a lot of the horror compared to Alien, where Alien is like this. I mean, I don't know. Scream and Alien are both kind of big watershed moments now that I think about it, because Alien is so much. My mind and my heart are battling each other right now, but my brain is saying Alien, my heart is saying Scream. Uh, I'm gonna go ahead and speak from the heart for this one. You know, a Scream, it's embodiment of horror for me, and the fun of horror and the fear of horror. So I'm going with Scream for the win here.
All right, and let's go to Johnny. What are you thinking? Scream or
I
Alien?
think we kind of spoke our piece on the movies in the first round. I mentioned right away. It's changed since then, but I said Alien was the second best movie that we had mentioned in this bracket, or the best. I don't even remember at this point. I said, oh, Alien was the best movie we mentioned at the point of the first round of this, and I think Alien just is too much to overcome for Scream. Scream has fun. Scream has its moments. I mean, I feel like I've kind of downplayed. Like, I am a fan of Scream, but I just think it's been parodied over and over again. And like, I saw Scream after I saw Scary Movie, so I kind of knew the whole movie going into it. But I had seen the parody of it. So um, Alien has never been parodied, and while the franchise itself is a lot of hit or misses, the first Alien movie is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. So I'm going to go Alien.
All right, and since I have not seen Scream, Bobby is the tiebreaker.
This is a tough one. I mean, it's tough because just looking at my list, one of these movies was my number 3 movie, and one of them was my number 6. They're pretty close. They're both in my top 10. Um, Scream holds a very special place in my heart. I saw it at a very formative age, and it has stuck with me. I've watched it a lot since then. I like I said, I like most of the rest of the franchise as well. But Alien, I think, just is one of my favorite movies of all time, and including like franchises with the first one and the second one, Alien and Aliens. One of the best creature designs. Like I said in the first round, Ripley is an iconic character as well. Um, I think that Scream is a very good movie, very meta. It did a lot of things very right of what it was trying to do. But Alien, I think, is it's a scarier movie. It has a lot more as far as filmmaking, a lot more iconic scenes and things that stick with you, including the chest burster scene and all that. And just the xenomorph itself. So I'm going to go with Alien. It was my number 3 overall horror movie. Scream was my 6. I like both these movies a lot, but I'm going to go with Alien.
All right, and that brings us to our next matchup, with Alien advancing, obviously, brings us to our next matchup of Get Out versus Candyman, and this is Get Out's debut in this bracket. So Get Out, directed by Jordan Peele, came out in 2017. It's about a young African American who visits his white girlfriend's parents for the weekend, where his simmering uneasiness about their reception of him eventually reaches a boiling point. And Johnny, what are your thoughts with these two?
Now, this is the second Jordan Peele movie that Candyman's gone up against. I think we mentioned a lot with Us that Us doesn't exist without Candyman. The same can be said for Get Out, but I think Get Out is just a few steps above Us. I'm very high on Us, but Get Out is kind of a mold breaker. It's one of the best movies. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. I think it's in my top 5 of the decade of which it came out. I think Candyman, while yes, it has its influence, at some point you got to look at overall quality compared to influence. If that overall quality is much higher than the other, so I think Get Out is just a much stronger movie. Candyman might have some scarier moments than Get Out, but the whole concept of Get Out seems to kind of take what Candyman kind of influenced and just escalate that to a whole nother level, make it scarier, make it something that legitimately could, freak people out, make people uncomfortable, things like that. So I think Get Out is an incredibly well directed, well acted, some of the best performances ever. I think Allison Williams and um, what's his
Daniel
name, the lead
Kaluuya.
actor Daniel Kaluuya, could have
Yeah,
won
Daniel
Oscars for
Kaluuya.
this movie. Um,
Well, one of them did.
so yeah, I gotta go. I gotta go Get Out here.
All right, and let's go with Bobby for our next pick.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember the first round, I picked the first Jordan Peele movie over Candyman as well. And like I said, I do really like Candyman, but like Johnny said, I think that Get Out, even though it may have some influences from Candyman and Jordan Peele, definitely it was one of the formative movies in his career. I think Get Out, the premise of it is a scarier premise as far as like just to put you in that world and like you're in it, you kind of realize what your main characters are in and you know, Johnny said a lot of it, but Get Out, I think, between the performances, the direction, the comedy involved as well, just to kind of break the tension at times with his friend character that's kind of back and is the comedic relief. I think that just kind of puts it ahead of Candyman, which is a very good movie, but I think that Get Out is just I think it's going to be known as one of the best horror movies of all time. It obviously got a lot of Oscar attention. It's very much a like kind of Twilight Zone inspired kind of movie, and I think that it will stand the test of time as one of the best horror movies ever made. So I'm gonna go with Get Out.
All right, and so with me not seeing Candyman, that means Get Out has 2 of 3 votes. But while I update our bracket, I'll let Tristan talk about where his mind was at for these two.
I was having a hard time with this one because I think both of these are some of my favorite horror movies, and Candyman I think has a slightly better ending than Get Out does. I think the ending of Candyman is really powerful, and the baby burning in the fire is a really powerful image, and I but I think both of them are just absolutely top tier horror movies. Like if we talked about how Get Out is probably going to be among the best horror movies of all time, but I do think Candyman is also among the best horror movies of all time. But Get Out, I think I was just gonna would have taken the win for me just because I think it's a step above in terms of its commentary. It's a step above in terms of a lot of its direction and its performances, and it might just be a recency bias to the fact that like I like that I got to experience Get Out. Like if it was like one of those similar to like Parasite, where it's like, oh wow, I'm experiencing something that's like going to be remembered. Like this is a movie that's like a turning point movie. So when I watched Get Out, I was really blown away by it. So I would have given the win to Get Out, but it would have been a tough call.
All right, so Get Out advances with a clean 3-0 sweep, and that brings us to our final matchup on the left side, and that is Doctor Sleep versus Psycho, one of the most iconic horror movies of all time versus a sequel to one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. 2 movies that basically came out almost 60 years apart. I'll start this one off. This one is like looking back is a lot closer than I would expect it to be. One of them I saw a number of times growing up, the other one obviously being very recent. For me, I feel like the quality of both films is very similar, but there are moments in Doctor Sleep where a lot of the times where they do a lot of the Shining stuff almost feels a little bit like TV movie-ish to me. And for that reason, because Psycho doesn't have anything like that, there's never like a lower moment or a lesser moment in that movie. I feel like it's pretty high quality all throughout. My vote is going to be for Psycho, and I will go to Johnny to see where his vote lies between these two.
Yeah, Doctor Sleep, like we said, I have a lot of love for it. I think Mike Flanagan elevated the source material, much like Stanley Kubrick did with The Shining, elevated the source material to make a stronger movie than book. But yeah, Psycho's one of the greatest movies of all time. And I think while we might have a tougher matchup with Get Out versus Psycho in terms of like you watch Get Out and you know like, okay, this is a moment in cinematic history. This is going to go down as a classic forever and ever. Versus a movie that by the time any of us had seen it, you already knew the impact of it. I don't think Doctor Sleep has the same impact of the film culture as Get Out did. So I think this one is an easy win for Psycho.
All right, and Tristan, what are you thinking between these two?
I was super impressed by Doctor Sleep, like I mentioned before. So I'm glad that it got this far and that it's kind of even holding a candle against Psycho in the conversation. I would never have thought that it would have. You would think Psycho is one that would just blow it out of the water, but the fact that I even thought for a second of of Doctor Sleep is like a good sign of how much I like the movie. But uh, I do think the ending of Doctor Sleep is a little bit hokey. Like they're back in when they're back in the hotel from the original movie, and all the ghosts are showing up again, and like there's all of a sudden there's these things, a bunch of cameos and stuff connecting to the first movie. I thought all of a sudden it became like a Disney Star Wars movie or something. Like I was saying, all of these connections to the previous movie for no reason. And I think the book did not have all of that stuff in it, so I wasn't really expecting it to be that connected. And then so that kind of threw me off a bit at the end. So I guess I'll give the win. I mean, Psycho is hugely iconic, so it's a much better movie, I think, than Doctor Sleep is. And Doctor Sleep is a very good horror movie, but I think Psycho is like an all-time great horror movie. Really fantastic score, incredible performances, great twists, really, really unique marketing. Doctor Sleep will go down as like one of those movies that came out and missed and never really gotten seen by people that probably should have gotten seen by people. And Psycho is like the opposite. It was the huge hit that everyone saw and everyone talked about. So I'm gonna give the win to Psycho here, even though I do like Doctor Sleep a lot.
All right, and so with that, Psycho obviously advances. Bobby, what were your thoughts on that while I dial up our next two matches?
Yeah, very very similar to everyone else. I am a big fan of Doctor Sleep. I'm glad that it made it past the first round and is in the conversation because I do like I would probably if I had to pick one right now to put on TV just because I like to watch it would probably be Doctor Sleep just because I haven't seen it as often as Psycho, and they're both very entertaining. But Psycho is an all-time great. Anthony Perkins is fantastic. And then I think that Doctor Sleep just gets held down a little bit just by the fact that it is a sequel, and like you said, it has a lot of homages to The Shining at the end of the movie that just kind of push it down a little bit more than a movie like Psycho, which is an all-time classic original movie that it's going to be a difficult matchup no matter who it's going against. So I would go Psycho as well.
All right, and
I definitely recommend the book Doctor Sleep if you haven't read it. It doesn't have all of the cheesiness connecting it to the original movie. It's much more focused on the character and stuff like that. So I think you guys might like it, maybe possibly more than you like the movie.
all right, and with that, we jump over to the right side for the second round. We have Halloween from 1978 going up against Evil Dead 2, and Halloween, directed by John Carpenter. 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night 1963, Michael Myers escapes from a mental hospital and returns to the small town of Haddonfield, Illinois to kill again. And Bobby, your vote really didn't matter last time, so I'll start this with you. Halloween or Evil Dead 2?
Yeah, this is I don't know how close it's going to be for everyone else, but I feel like this one is very close to me because Evil Dead 2 is just so much fun to watch. It's a movie that you could put on at any time and just get enjoyment out of it. But part of it is that Halloween is the movie that you want to watch on Halloween or in October on Halloween time. It's it's very much a horror movie to its bones. It's not a horror comedy like Evil Dead 2, even though that one is kind of bonkers crazy and just fun with Bruce Campbell. I think Halloween's a classic. I think you get one of the most iconic slasher characters in Michael Myers in that that set up a franchise that has been up and down, but it's lasted a very long time on the back of this movie for a very good reason. I think it's much better than a lot of the like Friday the 13th and all that. I think that Halloween just takes it because it is a true Halloween horror movie, and at the heart of it, and it's scarier, and it's one that you want to put in to with a family or with friends just at Halloween time to get in the spirit of it. So I'm gonna go Halloween.
All right, and Tristan, I know you're a big fan of both of these movies, so
Yeah, this is a painful one. I think both of these are really fun, rewatchable movies that get me totally in the spirit of the Halloween season. I Both of these are ones that I kick off my October with every year because I think they both kind of get you in the mood for what you're getting in the season. A lot of people watch Halloween on Halloween night, which makes a lot of sense, but I like to watch it at the beginning because it's so good that it makes me want to watch horror movies more and more and more. Like you watch it and it's so good, you're like, oh, give me more of this, give me more of this, and it's like every time I watch it, I'm blown away by how good it is. And you think of these franchises like this of like, oh, it's Michael Myers going around killing a bunch of people. And the first Halloween is not really that. It's very much about the tension. And there's only a couple of deaths. And we mentioned Texas Chainsaw Massacre is bloodless but still scary, and so is Halloween. There's actually not any blood in Halloween. It's all a lot of the deaths are off screen, and or even if they're not off screen, they're kind of in the distance in the darkness, and there's not actually any blood on the screen in Halloween. There's not a lot of bloody deaths in Halloween. So I give it a lot of credit for that, for still being really scary, even with all of that. But Evil Dead 2, talk about not having blood. Evil Dead 2 is like a bath of blood. It's like the complete opposite of Halloween. It's going bonkers. It's being crazy. And I love throwing it on for the complete opposite of what Halloween is, where Halloween is tension and Evil Dead is just fun, and it's hard to differentiate between what do I want, fun, or do I want like a really well-crafted, all-time great horror movie. And for me, Halloween is genuinely an all-time great movie. There's some fantastic scenes, just incredible craft, and Evil Dead 2 is so much fun to watch, but Halloween is like a monumental shift in the entire film industry. So I'm going to go with Halloween.
all right, and Johnny.
Yeah, I want to just echo a lot of the love for Halloween. I mean, what else is there to say? Halloween is there's no better movie to have the name Halloween than that. It still holds up to this day. Maybe some younger viewers, if they check it out for the first time, think it's a little slower than what they're used to. But I think just the way that it builds anticipation, it is a slow burn. It builds up to an amazing ending, and it's one of the greatest scores of all time. I think it's the greatest horror movie score of all time. That's what really makes it work. Because even just Michael Myers sitting there staring at a character walking across the sidewalk is still tension building because of that score. I think so much can be said to that, and John Carpenter is an amazing director, and he creates all his own scores. So I think that is Evil Dead 2 is super fun, but Halloween is iconic in so many different ways. And I think, takes movies that it was influenced by and transcends that. I think that's important, and still continued to influence movies that came out in the future. So Halloween gets my vote as well.
All right, and normally I would vote, but after doing some research during this episode, after seeing some stuff, I realized Evil Dead 2 is not the movie I watched at that truck stop. The movie I watched was Army of Darkness. So, just after hearing our guys talk about it, I'm like, none of that really sounds familiar, and I looked it up and I figured it out that, Army of Darkness, that's the movie I watched. So,
well, that
does make sense.
Because, Army of Darkness is super fun, but you have to have seen Evil Dead 2 first.
Yeah, no, I haven't. So, oops.
I know that feeling, Joe.
So, with that, Halloween advances, and we go to The Thing from 1982 versus The Exorcist from 1973. And I will start with who do I start? I'll start with Bobby, I guess.
This one is very tough, and honestly, on my list, I may have had the pick that I am going to say lower than the other one. But just thinking about it, the movie that I would rather put on and watch, and that I think has a lot of more entertaining characters, more kind of visuals that I would prefer to see, I think it's The Thing. I know we're going pretty long right now, so to move it along, I think they're both fantastic movies. I think The Exorcist is not quite as scary, and that's why I'm gonna say The Thing is gonna take it over The Exorcist for me.
All right, I'll go next. I didn't really talk about The Thing the last time because I think it was going up against something I hadn't watched. But for me, my main, I've talked about it before, but maybe it was just in text chat or off air. But basically, my main thing against The Thing, because I watched it for the first time really about 2 or 3 weeks ago or so. It's that like all of its iconic moments were things I've seen in like various like movie documentaries or like just things about movies. So every time something like big or cool showed up, I was like, oh, that's where that's from. And I wish I had kind of been able to see it like fresh for the first time and uh, not as something that I've seen. And The Exorcist was something I saw when I was a lot younger. I think I was like 10 or 12 the first time I watched it, so it was a lot fresher for me when I watched it. And and I've revisited a lot more, and I think I'll revisit The Exorcist more than I would revisit The Thing. So for me, I would give my vote to The Exorcist. And I will go to Tristan next.
It's a tough call now, Joe, because you put me in a compromising position. Uh, it's really hard because these are some of my favorite movies of all time, not just horror, but my favorites ever. And Exorcist, I've seen it so many times. I watched it in theaters last Halloween, and I was just blown away by it because you think I've seen it so many times and it can't get any better. And then you watch it again, and it's better each time you watch it. You pick up on different things that are scary and different parts of the character arcs that are really powerful. And even though you could say, oh, this couldn't actually happen in real life, like possessions don't really exist, but I'm not afraid of the possessions, but I can like feel the fear of the characters on screen. You know, I can feel the fear of a mother who's watching her something terrifying happen to her daughter and not being able to explain it because the mother in this story is not religious. You know, she's kind of a non-believer, and yet she's being faced with this completely unbelievable spiritual experience that she is just. It doesn't go. It goes against her worldview, and yet it's happening in front of her. And I think that's something that is fundamental to horror. Like you're seeing something that should not be real that is yet happening in front of you, and that's terrifying. And I feel the terror of that character. The Thing has amazing effects, some of the greatest practical effects I've ever seen. And you watch it now, and it all holds up so well. And I've mentioned before how practical effects are really a prominent part of horror and something that I watch horror specifically for. So for me, I'm going to go with The Thing because it has so many great moments. And I think it's a movie of moments. You know, it's a movie of these really cool effects and Carpenter showing off what he can do practical effect wise and the very minimal character work. You get them what you need just so that you can kind of follow them in the story. And it's iconic. It's great effects. So I'm going to give the win to The Thing, even though it is a hard call because Exorcist is still one of the greatest movies of all time. But I'm going to squeeze the win to The Thing here.
All right, Johnny, you sending The Exorcist down back to hell, or are you gonna make this interesting and make our show run to like 4 hours long?
Yeah, it's hard because I honestly, if I'm talking about like what is the better made film, it's probably The Exorcist. But The Thing is a scarier movie, I would say. It has a lot of amazing effects that still hold up. The Exorcist, I think what would have make The Exorcist like a 5 out of 5 star movie rather than what I think it is like more of like a 4 out of 5 is if you had more of a relationship with Reagan before she's possessed by the demon. But like The Thing, you don't have much of a like in comparison, The Thing, you don't have much of a relationship with the characters before any of this stuff starts happening, but that kind of builds throughout. And I think it does a better job of that, making you care about the people involved. Now, realistically, I don't know. This is like a coin flip for me. But the winner of this matchup is going against Halloween, so it's like leading the lamb to the slaughter. So I'm just gonna push through The Thing, so it will lose next match to Halloween anyway, because I don't think Exorcist passes it either, and we don't need to come up with some big tiebreaker just so a movie could lose in the next round. So I'm going The Thing to win the coin toss.
All right, and that brings us to our first matchup of the second round in the bottom right corner of our bracket, which is It Chapter 1 versus Midsummer. It Chapter 1 came out in 2017, directed by Andy Muschietti. In the summer of 1989, a group of bullied kids band together to destroy a shape-shifting monster which disguises itself as a clown and preys on the children of Derry, their small Maine town. And I will let Tristan kick this off.
This is rough because I do love It Chapter 1, especially as an adaptation of this like elongated cocaine nightmare of Stephen King. That's like uh, very hard to adapt into a movie because you have those parallel narratives and it's kind of hard to turn it into a single movie. And I think they made the best choice here, pulling the kid characters out and just giving us that story. And it's very compelling, and the performances are great. The relationships are really great, uh, and I think there's some really really great sequences here, like the projector scene where Pennywise is kind of like coming and turning around slowly in the image, and then kind of jumps out at him, and it's a really effective jump scare. That jump scares are such a dead and done thing in horror at this point, but it managed to have some really strong jump scares and some really memorable moments. So I think it is also similar to The Thing. It is a movie about moments, a movie of moments that I'm always going to remember, sequences I'll always remember. But for me, Midsummer is a movie I'll always remember, a whole entire product that I think delivered a theme really well and delivered like this craft really well and made me feel like the sweat and the heat of the characters. And these are both kind of like summer set movies. You know, they're both set in a similar time frame, and I think Midsummer just uses its setting a bit more and sets you off course a bit more, and really kind of set up a director for a great career. And I think It Chapter 1 is a cool, fun one-off that kind of is not necessarily going to be a career-defining. Like I'm not here waiting for Andy Muschietti's. I'm not dying waiting to see what Andy Muschietti is going to do next. He just made like a solid, good horror movie. Versus Ari Aster, I think people are lining up to see what he does next. So I'm going to win the Midsummer here.
All right, I'll go next. My vote goes for It Chapter 1. Not because I'm a contrarian, but one of my big things for me, if I'm like looking for a movie, is rewatchability. I think it destroys Midsummer in the rewatchability factor. I like the relationship of the kids' characters more than any of the relationships in Midsummer and the dynamics, and there are a lot of great horror moments in It Chapter 1. And with that, I will go to Bobby.
Yeah, to me, it's not that close because, like you said, a rewatchability. It's It Chapter 1 for me as well. I think there's a few things. I think the cinematography in It Chapter 1 is fantastic. I think the character building with the kids is great. The interactions between them, and also just the city that they created with Derry, the town, and making that really a character and really diving into that. And that movie sucks me into the world as I'm watching it. And it does something, that a lot of movies I can watch and appreciate, and I like it, but It Chapter 1 kind of transports me into the world of that movie when I see it. Midsummer is disturbing and it's very scary, but It Chapter 1 is just on a whole other level for me. So I'm gonna go It Chapter 1.
All right, and I don't know what Johnny's up to, if he can talk right now or what he's doing. So
I'm good. Okay, so I'm gonna make this interesting because I love It Chapter 1 a lot. It's my 26th movie of the decade, but Midsummer is my 21st movie of the decade, and I think it is a good horror movie. I think it has a lot of elements, but it's not a complete story, and I think that hinders it a little. And I think Midsummer, like I said, is a masterpiece. It is not. It's a very good horror movie. I was shocked to see it at number 2 for both Bobby and Joe of horror movies of all time. I'm a huge fan of the book, despite some super problematic elements that don't hold up, which I'm glad they changed for the movie. But again, just like in It Chapter 2, I don't think enough people talk about the ending of the original It just kind of being like blah. And while the rest of the movie maybe makes that stronger, Midsummer is a stronger movie from start to finish, and it's a masterpiece. And it is a good horror movie with some scares, but not as much tension. Midsummer, you don't know who's going to die. You don't know who's going to live. You don't know what's going to happen. And I think it is just held back a little bit because if you know the source material, you know who's going to die. You know who's going to live. You know the kids aren't actually really in danger. You know, and I think that hinders it a little as far as like a standalone horror movie. I think you have to look at, it's called It Chapter 1. You have to kind of look at both movies to really say that like this is the complete story. And if you combined It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2, it's not even a comparison. Midsummer is a much better film because It Chapter 2 is, I'm an apologist for It Chapter 2, but I recognize that it's not a super well made movie. And I think that kind of just that coming out and not being as good of a movie hinders It Chapter 1 and Midsummer. From start to finish, you can watch at any point, at any time. And it's a complete story that holds your attention the whole time and has a lot of just as many scares and characters that are almost as memorable and don't have any like prior basis to be as memorable. So I'd go with Midsummer here. Surprisingly easily, even though they're pretty close in my rankings. They're only 5 off, and not like my top horror movies ever, but my movies of the decade. But I think Midsummer's a much better made film.
All right. I assume no one's switching here.
We're at an impasse here.
Yeah.
It looks rough. It's hard because you guys have it so high on your list, but I'm like so. It's not like I hated it, but it's like I don't see it being anywhere in the level of Midsummer as a horror as a movie.
I don't think it belongs in the conversation of greatest horror movie ever made. And I think Midsummer, whether it hit you or not in the way it did, I think there's more people that would argue that it is in the conversation of greatest horror movie ever or greatest horror movie of like the decade than It Chapter 1. Like it has great performances. You like the kids. It has some humor in it. I love the loser lover on the cast, and Skarsgård or whatever is great as Pennywise, but Midsummer as a whole is just a better actual like horror movie start to finish telling a whole story.
Yeah, but see, to me, because Midsummer, I feel like it hits you or it doesn't. There are some people that are going to watch that movie and hate it. And I feel like it is scarier than it, because I think that It Chapter 1, like the scares don't necessarily get me, but I am way more attached to the kids and the characters and their performances and arcs in that movie rather than Midsummer. To me, that's the way that it hit me. And it created a world, like I said, that kind of transports you and you get lost in it. I think it did a better job at that. Midsummer is a scarier movie that is more gruesome, but it to me is a better movie that I could put on at any time and watch any scene and just kind of get lost in it, rather than Midsummer, where you have to watch it kind of as a whole piece to kind of probably enjoy it. And I can pick different parts of It Chapter 1 to put on and watch and enjoy. And it depends on what you're looking for in a movie. But like I said, I'm not as high on Midsummer as you guys are. I prefer Hereditary. And It Chapter 1 was way higher for me than either of those movies.
Yeah.
I'll say this, and I don't know if it like knocks Bobby's opinion at all, but I'll say, because knowing that Bobby's the only other person, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has read it or listened to the Audible of it. The scariest character in it is Patrick Hockstetter. And I was, especially after listening to the audiobook a couple times, it's very disappointing going back and watching the movie and realizing how watered down that character is, especially because they have the perfect actor to make that character as creepy as they could. So like going back and just knowing the source material, I think hinders it in more of a way than it should. Like going into a movie blank and having it like feel more original and feel like everything works, than going into a movie and being like, I wish they did more of this, or I wish they explored this a little. Even in It Chapter 2, they decided like, okay, now we have to have them in their camp, in their fort, because we kind of wasted having that in the first movie. I think that kind of hurts It Chapter 1 as a complete picture, knowing the source material and having seen It Chapter 2. I think hinders it more so. I think I was higher on It Chapter 1 before I read the book and before I saw It Chapter 2. I think I was higher on it, and now I have to look at everything as a complete picture, and I think that is what hinders it for me. And I don't feel like you have that same thing, because obviously you have
higher than me. To me, I separate them.
drag it down a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
because
to me, I separate them more. But Joe, yeah, what
yeah,
do
because
you
I'm
have?
kind of similar. Because like, number one, I haven't read the book, so I don't look at like It Chapter Two dragging down It Chapter One any more than I look at like Psycho Two or Psycho Three or any of those sequels dragging down the original Psycho.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. And even with the original source material, like I love the It book, but I think there are a lot of things in the movie version that they do improve upon. And I think that the most important part of the book It is the town of Derry and how you feel about the town, and kind of the environment that you're in, because there's the it creature kind of looms over the entire thing and puts this mood, and the movie does that perfectly. I even because I saw the movie first, and then well, we both listened to the audiobook. uh the movie captures the town so well that that is what I pictured while listening to the book. I'm like, this is exactly what it is. They executed it to a T. And also just the characters. I was way more attached to the characters in the movie, even than the book, because I think that they portrayed them in a very uh, just relatable and great way, and the relationships made a lot of sense that they put in the movie. So I don't know. It's just, to me, there's a lot more character dynamic and stuff that I like in it than I do in Midsummer, which I think, like I said, is a lot scarier. But that's kind of all that it has over it for me.
I think Midsummer with the main character, with Florence Pugh's character, you get the feeling of dread and loss and then finding her place in the world. And I think you get that in the book with Bill, but you don't get that in the movie because you never have him actually dealing with the loss of Georgie, because in the book Georgie's murdered and you see the neighbors like kind of witness it and ignore it. And I think that's more effective for a horror movie. And in the movie, you have the mystery of, is Georgie
Missing.
gone? Is Georgie alive? He's just missing. You have the person see it and kind of scramble over there. You don't get that same feeling of Derry that you should. I think they actually don't translate that as well. You get the one scene where a car drives by when um, uh, Ben is getting his name cut into him, but you don't get that feeling from Derry. It's kind of all over the place of, do the adults care? Do they not? I think they do that a better job with the book, and I wish they translated that better. Midsummer is the story of a character dealing with extreme loss and then finding her place. You've never seen a movie with the final girl just kind of joining up with the evil characters at the end. I think it's super original in that point, and I think just it had the source material to be a little stronger than it was. Again, this is one of my favorite movies of the decade, but I think it loses some steam because it doesn't translate everything as well as it could have.
I think I wanted to echo Johnny's sentiments. Bobby said he was really impressed by how the movie portrayed Derry and like the haunted town aspects of it, and like the fact that the darkness isn't just the monster; it's like the infection of the entire town. And I got that from the book really well. Comparatively to the movie, I didn't necessarily get that. The most you get from it is like literally a library research scene where he goes and looks through books and sees, oh, look at all these things that happened in Derry in the past, and like how many horror movies have like really cheesy, lame library research scenes, and it felt like very lazy. That was the only thing they could do, was have a library research scene, and that was it. I never got the sense that all of the adults had this knowledge at all. There was this kind of like overall curse element to the entire town. It felt much more like a traditional monster movie where it shows up, he terrorizes these kids, and then that's it. I didn't get the generational horror that the book translates so well, and I think part of that is because it's only the kid story, and I think it was a rough book to translate because you still have to tell that adult story to get that full generational storytelling of it. And when you cut one of the generations out, I think you miss that generational aspect. So if you want to say, oh, I wanted to watch this just as one movie, not as one part of a two-part thing, I think you have to totally forget about the adult storyline. And I think if you do that, you remove a lot of that legacy, a lot of that generational horror that I think makes a book so interesting. So for me, that was what didn't work for me in adaptation, is I didn't get the sense that Derry was a monster as a whole. I just got the sense that the scary clown monster guy was attacking them.
Yeah, see, I would still disagree with that because still, like, outside of like Mike's grandpa, every single adult in the movie has like a sense of evil in them, and then you still have the moments of like during the library research scene where he starts to walk away in the library and like in the background like gives him like an evil smile, and I think there's a lot of movies throughout where there's still, as someone who hasn't read the book, gets the evil vibe of the town throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, I mean the
So this
book
is
is
tough. How do
crazy
we
long, so too. So it's like
yeah.
you can live in the world and maybe get more examples of it, but in a movie version, in a 2 and whatever hour movie, I think they did as good of a job as you can do in that aspect. So yeah, I don't know how
I
we
just
get
think
past this
for
one.
a movie that is supposed to set up the next chapter, and the next chapter is about when adults are in Derry, they forget about their childhood, they forget about the horrors of the world, they just have this blissful ignorance. Yeah, the movie shows like the adults being evil, but what's missing is showing that the adults just ignore everything happening to the kids. And I think that is more memorable in the book and makes the adult section more memorable and more, you know, makes it just hit harder than in this movie where it's just like, oh, the adults are either all evil or, you know, not present. And I think that like showing that the adult's not caring, like I think it would have made the scene when Ben's getting his name, you know, cut into his own skin and the car just kind of drives by and looks at him, like that scene feels out of nowhere in that movie because you don't do anything to set that up and then you don't follow through with that the rest of the film. So I think those kind of weaken it. But that being said, I love it. So I think the only thing we can do here is maybe just like flip a coin or do something here to kind of figure out what advances, because I think Midsummer is just a much stronger movie overall. It is literally called, it like from the credits, it's It Chapter 1, which is a cool reveal, but I think you have to kind of look at it as a whole because it's not like they just made a sequel to It. It's not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then it's hindered because of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. It's It Chapter 1, It Chapter 2. It's kind of like Kill Bill and Kill Bill Volume 2. Like you look at it as a whole movie, and I think that's what keeps it off my list, whereas Midsummer is just a more complete film. So that's my final selling point. But if we want to just like flip a coin to decide what wins, if that's what we're getting down to, I think that's what we might have
Yeah,
to
because
do.
I feel like I don't think anyone's
I'm
conceding
gonna
at this point.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
go ahead and just say that even though I did love Midsummer, and I think it worked very well for me and worked very well for Johnny, I think It Chapter 1 was a cultural moment that I'll always remember watching. And I think, sure, it is technically, it says in the credits part 1, but I just looked it up. And like when you look it up on like Rotten Tomatoes and Wikipedia and everything else, the official title is not It Chapter 1. So I think you could sell this as a single individual thing. And I think as a single individual thing, it works. So I'll concede and give the win to It here.
All right.
That's fine.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and that's what I think of it as too, because I can watch this movie on its own and not really, because I liked Chapter 2 for what it was because I know the book, but you know, I think Chapter 1 was a whole nother level.
If they did deliver on Chapter 2 and it was amazing, like you would be looking at one of the greatest. If they were both great, I think there'd be no competition. But I think that it's hard to say when it literally is It Chapter 1.
All right, so that brings us
Right.
to our final matchup of round 2, and that is A Quiet Place versus Train to Busan. And I'm just gonna say we spoke a lot about both of these movies, and whoops, that's the wrong button. A lot about both of these movies, and I think Train to Busan kind of wrecks A Quiet Place out of the water. And with that, I will go to Johnny.
Yeah, I liked A Quiet Place a lot. I think it has, I think it's just such a great theater experience. But I think if at this point both movies are out of the theater, and if I was just going to sit there and watch one movie and enjoy it and not need a crowd to kind of escalate it, it's Train to Busan. It's a better movie. It makes me care more about the characters. It makes me care more about what's going to happen, and it actually has some surprises and deaths that you don't expect. Whereas A Quiet Place, outside of like the very opening that literally was in the trailer of the little kid dying, doesn't really have anything that like surprises you, or like you lose a character that you're connected to. I think that is a big part of horror movies, and Train to Busan has a lot of that. You're connected to characters and then you lose them, and that impacts you. I think that is what puts it. I'm not going to say it blows Quiet Place out of the water, but I think that is the element of the film that escalates it over A Quiet Place. You lose characters you actually care about in A Quiet Place. You don't get that.
All right, and Bobby, what are your thoughts? Train to Busan or A Quiet Place?
All right. Well, I think I know where Tristan's going based on his thoughts on A Quiet Place in the first round. So I have to give my vote to A Quiet Place, which I had on my list. They're both really good. I like Train to Busan a lot, but A Quiet Place, not just a theater experience, but any time that you watch it, to me, it kind of works very well with that silent gimmick and all that. So um, I prefer A Quiet Place. They're both great movies. I'm happy with Train to Busan moving forward because I know that is where Tristan's going.
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Train to Busan. I think interestingly enough, these both go for similar ideas of like the family dynamic and particularly the father-child dynamic. But I felt more engaged in the family of Train to Busan than I did in the family of Quiet Place, which is interesting because like the whole movie's focused on that family and building up that family in Quiet Place, and Train to Busan has just the minimal amount of effort. But I felt much more the death at the end of Train to Busan versus the death at the end of Quiet Place. My heart was shattered at the end of Train to Busan. And at the end of Quiet Place, I was like, yeah, that's probably where the plot was going to go. Like I figured enough. That's probably what was going to happen. And Train to Busan had me enthralled enough that I didn't care that it was in a way predictable that the ending would be what it was. But yeah, Quiet Place, great, very watchable movie. I think it's maybe even more watchable than Train to Busan, but I think Train to Busan just pulled off what Quiet Place tried to do a little bit better.
All right. And that brings us to our first matchup in round three, and that is The Shining versus Alien. And this may be, for me, the toughest matchup yet. One that I really didn't think would be all that tough. But I'll kick this one off again, and I'll say as far as horror movies, it's the one I put as my personal number one. Maybe a little spoiler alert for later on of what may reach the finals, but that is The Shining. I feel overall, I would say it's scarier, and I would say as a horror movie, of what influenced more horror movies later on, it would be The Shining, or the Alien more later on inspired more of like the action genre. So that's where I would go is The Shining. Tristan, what are you thinking?
It's tough. I mean, they're both some of my favorite movies of horror, especially of horror. But for me, The Shining is not just a great horror movie; it's a great movie. It's going to stand up the test of time forever. And I walk out of Alien. I think that was really good. It was remember the chest burster scene. There's a lot of cool moments you remember. But I walk out of The Shining like contemplating the movie. And the days later, I'll still be thinking about The Shining. And for me, that's really a powerful thing in a movie when you can sit there days after you've seen it, or even if you haven't seen it in years, and it can come up in your mind, and you'll be thinking about The Shining and what it was trying to say, what it was meaning, and some of the moments and visuals. So for me, The Shining wins over Alien for this. Even though I do like Alien a lot, I think The Shining, it's not particularly close for me, even though I do really like Alien.
All right, and let's go with Bobby.
Yeah, it's my number one pick versus my number three pick. So these were very high on my list for sure, but not to, we're going a little long, so I don't want to reiterate a lot. But The Shining is to me just it's the horror movie. I think it's one that you revisit as one of the most influential and one of the most watchable and scary for a lot of different reasons movies. So I'm going to go with The Shining, even though Alien is fantastic.
All right, and Johnny, your vote doesn't matter. The Shining advances, but you okay with this pick? What are your thoughts?
The Shining is higher on everybody's list than Alien is, even if some of them are close. So that's not a surprise to me. But Joe, I will say, your number three movie was The Shining, and your number one movie, which could get interesting, was Train to Busan.
Oh yeah, I forgot there was some reshuffling after some changes. Because I think I originally had Jaws number one or something, and then we decided not to include Jaws, so then I did some reshuffling.
Yeah, so you had Train to Busan, then It, Chapter 1, and then The Shining. So you even had It over The Shining.
Good Lord.
Well, I like what I like. I thought The Shining was my overall number one. What do I know? Alright. So that brings us to our next matchup, which I forgot what it was already. We have Get Out versus Psycho, and this is where things could get interesting. And since, Johnny, your vote didn't matter last time, I'll let you kick off the first vote.
I'll be quick here. Get Out is incredible, and it's one of probably the best modern day horror film of all. Of the modern horror films, but Psycho is probably the best horror movie ever made. It was my number one, so I'm going to go with Psycho.
All right, I'm gonna counter that opinion and say Psycho's great. I love it, but I almost think, like the thing like the sunken place, and there's so many moments in Get Out that have already become iconic and will be, continue to be iconic. And I think the writing is, I mean, it's hard to tell like how clever the writing in Psycho is because it inspired so much and we like grew up with it just existing. But just reading various articles and all this thing of all the nuances within the writing of Get Out. So I will vote for Get Out. And Bobby, what are you thinking?
This is a very tough one, but in a similar way to you, Joe, I think that even though Psycho is a classic and it is considered one of the best movies ever made, I think Get Out is going to be put in that category as far as horror movies and as far as a breakthrough in pop culture with The Sunken Place and with all that it inspired. It's going to inspire a lot of filmmakers moving forward. And to me, it is a more rewatchable film at this point in time than going back to watch Psycho, even though they're both fantastic. I'm going to go with Get Out, but this is a close one. Obviously, that's probably going to be a hot button issue for some people because Psycho is a classic. It's a very, very much a classic movie, but I'm going to go with Get Out.
Me.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Tristan, we're going to have another contentious back and forth, or are you going to send Psycho back to the basement with its dead mother?
It's really, really tough to say because it's easy to look at Psycho and say, oh, it's one of the most influential movies of all time because, of course, it is. We're looking at it like, 50, 60 years since it came out. We can already see the impact and the legacy. And it's a fantastic, fantastic movie with an incredible performance from Anthony Perkins. I think the hotel and the setting is really iconic and interesting. People know the Bates Motel as much as they know the shower scene from the movie, as much as they know like the twist ending. And there's a lot of really great moments here. But it's going to be rough because we do have
I wouldn't
like
hurt a fly.
Psycho is such an influence to all of these slasher movies.
And it holds up. You can't say it's just an influence. It holds up.
It does.
So
It
well.
mostly holds up, except for the last few minutes when like the guy comes in and explains for like 7 minutes straight the entire plot, just in case the audience fell asleep and didn't watch the movie. And I'm like, okay, sir, I saw the movie.
Like every horror movie ever made.
Get Out doesn't. I mean, it kind of sits and explains the plot to you, but it doesn't like explain the themes. It doesn't
Literally
tell you what
puts
to
it on
think.
the TV.
That's true. I've criticized it for that before, so I feel like it would be a lie to say I think the ending of Get Out is great because I think they both have similar flaws in a weird way. But Psycho is interesting because it got a bunch of people to come out and see it. And it was people lined up down the blocks, and it was like you got to get in before it starts because the surprise is going to be so good that we don't want you to miss it. And I love that people went out and saw a horror movie like that, but I want to give the same credit to Get Out. Get Out is a movie that could have just been like a mid-tier horror movie made by some comedy director that was big for people like me or people like Johnny who watch a lot of horror movies, but maybe not for like all kinds of people. And the fact that it went from what could have been a niche kind of genre hit to a genuine massive hit, like a cultural phenomenon, an Oscar-winning movie. That's incredible to me. And I'm going to go ahead and give the win to Get Out, even though I do think both of these movies are in the pantheon of all-time fantastic movies.
And
I think we have some slasher representation. Like we're going to have Halloween on the list, so I don't think we need multiple. If we're going for the final four here, I think it's more interesting to throw in Get Out. Get a stronger variety in our final four. So I'm going to go ahead and give the win to Get Out here, just barely above Psycho.
All right.
They both have exposition endings, but I think Get Out at least looks cooler than the guy standing around talking. At least you got the cool TV and you got the kind of stylisticness of it. And so I'm going to go for Get Out.
All right, which means we jump
Which
over
means
to,
Johnny's sad.
which means we jump over to the right side of our bracket where we have Halloween versus The Thing, and I will let Bobby kick this one off.
This one's closer to me than I don't know. The Thing is a very entertaining and fun movie to watch and very tense with the whole you don't know who to trust everything and all that, but it's hard to go against Halloween. on a horror movie, just a pure horror movie bracket. So I'm gonna, everyone knows what Halloween is. It's very iconic. The score, exactly, like as soon as you hear it, it's Michael Myers. It's Halloween. It's kind of become the theme of Halloween as a holiday itself. And I think the first one, is very, one of the best slashers, one of the more iconic movies. So I'm going to go with Halloween, even though it's very close.
All right, and Tristan, Johnny, you only voted for The Thing, knowing that it would eventually just lose to Halloween anyway. So I feel like I know where your vote's going, but I'll let you express yourself.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. Halloween.
All
That's all
right.
I got.
All
Very
right,
quick.
and I echo the same sentiment. My vote would be for Halloween as well, and I'll let Tristan give his thoughts while I update the bracket.
Love The Thing. Great special effects, really memorable moments, and really memorable premise too. It's an easy premise. Like people have remade The Thing in various different ways of like, oh, you trap people in a room and then you kind of like ramp up the tension and see what happens. And I think it has a lot of great moments, a lot of great effects. But Halloween is like an all-time incredible movie, and it doesn't get it. I mean, it's hard to say it doesn't get enough credit, but I feel like it gets put in the box of slashers when it isn't necessarily as slasher as you might think that it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and give the win to Halloween, even though these are both two of the greatest horror movies of all time. It's got to be Halloween.
All right, and that brings us to our last matchup in round 3. And that, based on how the last conversations have gone, I think everyone knows how this matchup is going to go. And that's It Chapter 1, or just It, I guess as we should call it now, versus Train to Busan. And if you've been paying attention, Johnny said Train to Busan is my number 1, apparently, is what I voted for.
Yeah.
So my vote, I'm just going to say, is for Train to Busan. While a very close match, I just have to give it to Train to Busan. And Tristan, your vote didn't matter last time, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, it's Train to Busan. I think I talked a lot of shit on it, like I didn't like it or something, but I thought it was definitely a good one. But Train to Busan sits with me a lot, and I'll always think back to the first time watching that and being blown away by not just the ending, which I think was what sat with me the most, but there's a lot of characters and moments throughout that I think did great. And to revive the zombie genre in an era when I thought there was no possible way I'd ever like anything zombie ever again, really impressive. So I'm going to go ahead and give Train to Busan.
All right, and Johnny, because you had to watch It Chapter 1, move beyond your beloved Midsummer, I will let you give It Chapter 1 the death blow in this round.
Yeah, you say that, but It Chapter 1 is my 26th movie of the decade, and Train to Busan is my 46th movie of the decade. I don't think this one is as close as The Last Fight. I think It Chapter 1 is a much better horror movie than Train to Busan is. Train to Busan is a good zombie movie. It's probably the best zombie movie ever made, but a zombie movie can only be so good. While I talk shit on it to try to get Midsummer advanced, I've never seen something portray its lead characters better from book to movie than it did. With the kids, that's not a point that I brought up with the last thing. I didn't mention kids, but Bobby did, and I didn't hit against it because I agreed with it. I think it misses some points. I think it is hindered a little bit by some of the stuff I mentioned in the last round. But It Chapter 1, or It, is, especially if we're looking at it as a solo film, is a better horror movie with much more memorable performances, and while you don't lose the characters that you care about, the characters are more memorable as a whole than Train to Busan. Train to Busan has a few characters that you lose, like the dad. He's struggling with like fatherhood, and then you lose him, and it's very sad. Spoiler alert. And you lose the dude that was just in Eternals, and that's like the most heartbreaking moment of the movie.
Sure.
But in it, it just encapsulates the actual like the losers so well. I think it does do a good job translating the main points from the book to the movie. I think it misses points that I would have liked to see, but Train to Busan doesn't have the source material where I can point to and say, I wish it had this or I wish it had that. It was just a good movie, and it's in my top 50 of the decade, which is good. but it is in my top 30, and it's 20 spaces ahead of it. So I think it gets the win here.
All right. So, Bobby, you're gonna make this interesting, or are you gonna?
It's gonna be this is I mean, based on my arguments from the last round, and I voted against Train to Busan before too. I'm going to go with it. I love this movie. It was my number 2 pick. All the reasons Johnny said. So yeah.
All right.
I'm
So
going
now
with
we
it.
have. Why is It Chapter 1 the most controversial movie, and I'm on the other side of the controversy,
know.
rooting for it this time, rooting against it.
Hey, at least I'm consistent.
Rooting against it this time. So
I will give it props. I do think it captured the characters super, super well from the source material, and even in a lot of better ways. I think it improved on like Beverly's character in a lot of ways, and I'll give it points for that. I think as an adaptation of that side of the story, like of the kid side of the story, I think it does a good job with it. Uh, Train to Busan definitely has like the unique appeal of being a foreign film as well, which I think kind of like for me boosted it a bit, where it felt a bit more unique than just like a typical movie. I think It Chapter One in some ways does fall into the same vein of a lot of that era of horror movies, where it's a lot of jump scares and a lot of kind of like, I don't know, not necessarily creative scares as much so. But Train to Busan, now that I'm talking, I don't know. It's hard. It's a really tough call because I do like It Chapter One, but I think Train to Busan gets me on the emotional level a lot more. I wouldn't be sad to see it take this, but I just think Train to Busan has much more of an emotional resonance than it does.
yeah, for me, I think Train to Busan does have like a lot more of that emotional. Like none of the main characters die in it, Chapter One, and even if they did, like if one of them died, I feel like it wouldn't have the same emotional impact as you do when the characters in Train to Busan die. And as for, like the final moments, I don't know if I felt like emotions like to that degree from watching It Chapter One as I do in Train to Busan. And I just think as far as like a movie bracket of like a zombie movie, I feel like it's by far the best zombie movie. Where It Chapter One, like there's a lot of other paranormal movies that with The Shining and all of these other that I just think did it better. And as far as it's like the best of the like foreign horror movies that I've seen, so for me, I'm locked
All
in
right.
on Train to Busan.
Okay. All right. I will say this. While I looked at my decade list and I had Train to Busan much lower than it, that is a list based on just movies in general, and I think it hits close to me because I love the source material. When I actually made my top 10 horror movie list, I had Train to Busan one spot ahead of it, now that I look at it. And I think the reason for that is while it means more to me as a movie than Train to Busan, I can't say that it is the best movie of its genre. I can't say it's the best, monster movie. I can't say it's the best slasher movie. I can't say it's the best Stephen King movie. But I can say that Train to Busan is the greatest zombie movie ever made. And I think when something is the top of its genre and you're talking about subgenres of horror, I think I concede my point, and I will go with Train to Busan to send it through here.
All right. Let the record show I convinced Johnny of a point. So.
It was more my own list, but I do agree with all the points you made.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would have more to say, but this is getting long.
Yeah.
Oh, and we lost Tristan.
Who needs him?
Yeah, what's he done on our podcast, He drags down our Disney Plus weekly review. All right, so we only have 3 matchups left. We have, to kick this off of the 4th round, we have The Shining from 1980 versus Get Out from 2017. And Tristan's not here. Fuck him, don't need him. Bobby, where are you going? Get Out or The Shining?
To be quick, I love Get Out. I think that it is going to be known as one of the masterpieces of the genre going forward, but The Shining is a masterpiece of the genre. It's my number 1 horror movie on my list. I'm going with The Shining.
All right, we were talking about Train to Busan is the best or of the zombie movies, I would argue that The Shining is probably the best of the paranormal movies. Granted, I don't even know what genre I would really place Get Out, like subgenre I would really place Get Out in.
Yeah.
But with that, my vote still goes for The Shining. Johnny, what are you thinking?
Look, in my last meaningless vote here, because I'm the only person that had Get Out higher than The Shining in my top 10, I will give this to Get Out because it's a better movie. The Shining is iconic. It has a lot of amazing moments. It's not that scary. It has some scares in it. It's more of like it'll creep you out, which is a form of being scared, but there's nothing in that movie that actually makes you like scared. I think the wife's performance. I forget the
Shelley
actress's
Duvall.
name at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she drags it down a little bit because she's terrible in it. And every other performance is amazing. I think Shelley Duvall is like right out of the really like C-level horror movies of the 70s, and then he threw her into a movie with Oscar level performances, so I think that takes you out every time she's on screen. I don't believe her as like a scared person. She's just screaming maniacally. Get Out has much stronger performances, a much more, I'll say, original story because it was an original concept, as The Shining was based off a book, even though it changed a lot of it. I just think Get Out overall is a better film and a more rewatchable film and a more kind of unique story than The Shining is. But it's literally 3 and 4 on my all-time horror movie list, so I don't want to act like I'm shitting on The Shining because it's very close, but I think Get Out's a better movie.
All right, and Tristan.
I'm gonna go with The Shining. It's an all-timer. Get Out is also an all-timer, but The Shining is like a step above it a little bit for me, and I think the craft is gorgeous in The Shining. There's so many shots and so many visuals in that movie that always stick with me, and lines that'll stick with me, and I think the performances are all really good. I think Shelley Duvall gives a great performance in the movie, and I think she had a rough situation with Kubrick on that movie, but I think it resulted in a good performance in the end. Actually, and I know she gets a lot of kind of crap for she brought down the movie, or I don't think she did, and I don't blame her for the performance that she gave. I think a lot of that comes out on Kubrick for the antics on set, but. I think The Shining is just like an endlessly debatable and endlessly thoughtful movie. And Get Out is also a very thoughtful movie, but I don't think you walk out of Get Out with any question of what Get Out is supposed to be about and what it's trying to say. Versus The Shining, I think you walk out and there's a bit of a question of what was he trying to do with this? What was he trying to say with this? And I love the risk of it too, so I'm going to go with The Shining.
All right, and that brings us to our final matchup in round 4, and I believe that is Halloween versus Train to Busan. And let's start with Johnny, who I feel like I know where his vote's going.
I'll make this quick. Halloween.
All right, and Bobby.
I'll be just as quick. Halloween.
All right, and Tristan.
I'll say Halloween.
All right, and I don't know where I was going, but I was really hoping that's how it would go, so I wouldn't have to give my vote. So Halloween advances.
Hell yeah.
Train to Busan went on a crazy run there.
It did.
Yeah, it did. That was our upset movie.
Yeah,
and
we
right.
gave no reason for it to lose, but it.
When you're up against Halloween, it's like
you know why.
Train to Busan is good, but how do you get this far?
It was one of
Train
those.
to Busan is the best zombie movie ever made, but Halloween is the best slasher movie ever made, and I prefer slasher movies to zombie movies.
Same.
Yeah, like even the iconography of Halloween might have been enough for me to like vote for it over Train to Busan and everything. And it's Halloween. How can? Yeah, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Halloween 2018, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if we. Oh, did we not
Halloween
make that clear?
H2O?
Yeah, it's
No, we did.
Halloween.
No, we did.
It's actually the Rob Zombie version that we're voting
Yeah.
for. No, but so we have our final matchup. We have the 1 seed versus the 2 seed. So not much of a shocker there. We have The Shining versus Halloween. And you know what? We started with Johnny last time. Let's start with him again.
Oh, this is a much tougher one. I can't just say Halloween, which I've said the past 2 times. But like I said, and like Joe mentioned, The Shining is one of the best slasher movies ever made. I mean, sorry, The Shining is one of the best paranormal movies ever made, but I voted for Get Out over The Shining, and I have Halloween over Get Out. Psycho was my number one. Psycho is my favorite horror movie, but I do think while you can say that's a slasher movie, Halloween is a better, like, just if you look at the subgenre of slasher movies, Halloween's a like the true most slasher movie. Of the two, I my vote is Halloween. It's higher on my list, and that's kind of the tiebreaker here. The Shining has great performances. I think Jamie Lee Curtis though is on par, if not better than Jack Nicholson in The Shining. So I think she's the best final girl of all time. I think she is the most interesting character in a slasher movie. Really makes you care about her. It really makes you not want anything to happen to her. And there's not really other than Danny Torrance being a kid, there's not anything in The Shining that oh, I'm really invested in these characters. I don't want anything to happen to them. The Halloween does that much better, so I would give that to Halloween, because if I'm looking for a horror movie, I want to be invested in the character and want to know that nothing's going to happen to them. And I think Halloween does that better than The Shining.
All right, let's go to Tristan next.
This is a tough call because we've praised both these movies heaps and bounds this whole episode. But I looked at my list and I have The Shining at number 7, which is a solid number for it, but not necessarily like the best of the best. And I have Halloween right at the top at number 1. I think The Shining is a great, fun to watch movie. It's all kinds of visual splendor and a lot of things to ponder. And there are sequences that I think are very scary. I think the twins in that movie are very scary. I think some of the woman in the bathtub is a very scary, and you feel the fear of Danny Torrance in that moment. And it has a lot of moments to remember. But Halloween is just like such a meticulously great crafted horror movie. It builds the tension so well, and I think we've seen so many franchises and movies rip off Halloween and try and do Halloween again, but all of them have kind of missed what Halloween had, and the slowness and in the building and in the fact that Laurie Strode is this character that's like this enigmatic person that you care about and you kind of like project yourself onto, and she's this embodiment of like just innocence and Midwest innocence, and I think it's a fascinating movie to watch. Really great sequences. I drove up when I was living in California because Haddonfield, in fact, was not filmed in Illinois. It was filmed in California, and you can go to kind of like the block that is Haddonfield, and you can like walk that street between Laurie's where she's babysitting, and like you can see all the places, or you can walk up to the bush where Michael Myers hid behind, and you get chills walking through that area just because of like the power of this movie. And I'm going to give the win to Halloween. It's a fantastic movie, and it might not have like the thematic depth of The Shining, but not every movie needs to have all of that thematic depth. Sometimes you just want to have a really, really well shot, really, really well scored movie that does all of the bare minimum in the best way possible, and that's what Halloween is. It's the bare minimum of a movie done in the best possible way you can do it, and it delivers.
All right, Bobby. Are we gonna try to make this interesting, or is it gonna be a vote for?
One of these movies is Bobby's number 1.
Yeah,
and it's not Halloween.
Right. So kind of the opposite of Tristan, where he had The Shining 7 and Halloween 1. I have The Shining number 1, and I have Halloween number 8. So, to me, The Shining is a far better movie than a film itself. I think as a slasher movie, like Halloween is fantastic. I think, like you said, Jamie Lee Curtis is one of the best final girls, but The Shining just hits me on a whole different level than any slasher movie. So I think it's more of a genre thing for me, where The Shining, to me, is just a better made film. The more philosophical type of stuff and the more like kind of scares that you're not necessarily seeing of someone hunting anyone down until the end of the movie, like watching someone go mad is scarier to me to watch than Halloween. So I'm saying The Shining. I get why these are the final two, but I got to go with my number 1 movie.
All right, so I'll say this: the vote's 2-1, and when I made this list, The Shining was number 3 on my list, and Halloween was not on it, which could make things very interesting. However, after sending Johnny my list, I have recently rewatched Halloween. You know, it's probably been 2 or 3 years since I saw it, and it didn't, for whatever reason, wasn't on my mind when I made my list. Maybe other things crept up before it. But I agree with pretty much all of Tristan's points of it's like the bare minimum of a movie done perfectly. In The Shining, there are some low points. Like, I don't know if I like Shelley Duvall's performance the best, and I agree with a lot of what Johnny said. Like, there's no like character that you kind of glom onto. So, and this isn't a vote I'm making just for time. My vote would actually be for Halloween. And so
Hell
with
yeah.
that,
Right.
Halloween.
I'm okay with that still.
Halloween wins 3-1.
Yeah.
The scariest movie, or the best horror movie of all time, is the one named after the holiday Halloween. I agree. I will say it is close, but I think it's fair to say, like, Kubrick's one of my favorite directors of all time. If you compare Kubrick to John Carpenter, I don't think it's there, like, in comparison. But John Carpenter is such an amazing horror director, with The Thing and with Halloween and with Christine and with The Fog.
Yeah.
And this was like Kubrick's one horror movie. I'm glad that an actual horror movie director is the victor of the tournament, because it was kind of like a one-off for Kubrick, making a Kubrick movie with some horror influence. I think it's more fair to the genre of horror that Halloween takes the win here.
Yeah, as we were doing this and like rethinking, I'm like, I should have had Halloween, and then I was like looking at my list that I sent. I'm like, where did I put Halloween? I'm like, how is Halloween not on my list? And like probably by
Not
like
on
the
your
second or
list.
third round, I'm like, oh, I hope Halloween gets to the end because I'm kind of rooting for Halloween to win it all. And then it got to that point, and I realized I figured out how everyone's votes were going, and I'm like, I'm gonna position it to where everyone thinks, oh, I'm gonna make this long as shit and have us be 2-2, but nope, I'm gonna have Halloween win it all.
I was
Sounds
thinking it would
ready.
end up 2-2 because it wasn't on your list, but
Yeah.
I will say, yeah, if Joe had watched Halloween right before making his list, it probably would have been the number 1 seed because it would have made his list, and it was only like a 1 point differential between The Shining and Halloween.
And it's
So-
probably because mine, I had it number 1 and Halloween number 8, which is probably the biggest spread between the two of them on anyone's list. Other than Joe not.
I mean,
having it
yes,
on
but
there.
also, yeah, other than Joe not having it on there, but yeah, like Tristan had Halloween 1, The Shining 7, I had Halloween 2, The Shining 4. So it would have been, if Joe even had like the Halloween at like 7 through 10, probably would have cut
Yeah.
the difference and made it Halloween might have been the 1 seed, and we'd have had a very different bracket, but we probably would have ended up with the same 2 movies. I think that's fair to say that I think we reached the best 2 movies when we did our Bond bracket. I think you could argue like From Russia with Love made the finals, and that's not something that a lot of Bond fans, like I know some old school Bond fans would have From Russia with Love in the top 2, but that's not something I think like any of us had in our top 2, and it made it there. I think this is a very fair final 2, and it's the 1 and 2 seed, which is it's Duke versus Kentucky. It's not what anyone wants to see, but it is what's expected, and it is the 2 powerhouses.
It's kind of cool, though,
Agreed.
that of our final 4, we had a movie from 78, a movie from 1980, and then a movie from 2016, and a movie from 2017. So it's kind of like these 2 movies that are like these 2 sets of movies that both kind of came out around the same time.
And I
Yeah.
like that we got these 2 kind of polar opposites of horror too, where The Shining is all this style and all of this like really about like the substance and the elevatedness of the similar to in a way Evil Dead and Suspiria and those movies I tried to get in where it was like, oh, this is going to be really fun and really kind of big, and I think The Shining has that bigness. And then Halloween is, like I said, it's the bare minimum. It's the complete opposite. You're taking it all back and making this like really really cheap movie. So it's cool that we got a big budget, massive movie from like a critically acclaimed art house director, and then we've got like the cult classic from a student who just wanted to make money that all of a sudden turned into a huge ginormous icon.
Yep.
All right, anyone else have any final thoughts before we sign off?
It was shockingly hard. A lot of great movies.
Midsummer.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of really tough ones. This one on for a long time, but there when we did the bond bracket, there was one less person. Bobby wasn't there. I would have been interested to see what would have happened. I don't know if Quantum of Solace would have made like the
No.
final four like it did if
No.
Bobby was there for
It
that.
would not have.
Even though it should. But for this, having four people and having such close matchups, definitely like, especially not just going based on here, we're going to just throw on the Rotten Tomato score. I think the bracketing system made things very interesting. And I think, there are some movies that could have made a much bigger run if they just didn't have the matchup they were. I'm thinking of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Yep.
and even like Candyman. I had a feeling just from what we were saying about the movie that Candyman could have made a run if it wasn't immediately facing Get Out after its first, kind of upset win. I think you could have had a lot of good upsets there, but some of the matchups kind of prevented that from happening. But I think in the end of the day, no matter what the matchups were, we reached the final two that would have made it anyway, shape or form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. If no one else has anything to say, I will say mine and Tristan's playthrough of Jedi Fallen Order should be going up sometime this week. If I was on top of things more, I could say confidently be up by Tuesday, tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And then also Disney Plus Day is this Friday. Me and Tristan are going to be doing a review of everything, all the information that drops and all whatever trailers and anything else that comes we'll do a reaction to. Or a review of, I guess I should say. And yeah, that's about it. And without further ado, goodbye.
Hey, thank you for watching the Movie Changeup podcast. We'd really appreciate if you liked, commented, subscribed, and shared us with anyone you think might be into what we're doing over here. Thank you. Have a nice day.